In late July 2017, this is the story of Caroline Stevens, a dedicated pediatric nurse whose life was cut short by a sinister plot involving her husband and their foster daughter. Caroline Stevens was a 52-year-old pediatric nurse who lived in Corvallis, Oregon. Known for her kind heart and dedication to her work, Caroline was a beloved figure in her community. She had a special gift for connecting with children, something that made her a standout nurse at the Louisville Hospital, Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center. Caroline's colleagues often spoke about her compassion and patience. She was the nurse who would stay late to comfort a scared child or to talk with worried parents. Caroline had a unique perspective on life. As a former foster child, she knew the struggles that many children faced. This personal history drove her to help others, especially children and teens in the foster care system. She was actively involved in community programs and often volunteered at local shelters. Caroline's friends described her as nurturing and empathetic, always willing to lend a helping hand. Her home was often filled with laughter and the smell of homemade cookies, a testament to her love for baking. Caroline was married to Dr. Oliver Stevens, an entomologist at Oregon State University. They had been married for over 20 years and were well known in the community. They had no biological children, but they had fostered several over the years. Their most recent foster child was Charmin Briscoe, who had turned 18 just a few months before Caroline's death. Caroline was very close to Charmin, treating her as her own daughter and supporting her plans to attend Oregon State in the fall. In the days leading up to her death, Caroline was busy with her usual activities. She had just organized a small charity event at her church, St. Mary's Catholic Church, where she was a devoted member. Her friends recalled how excited she was about an upcoming summer picnic planned for the children in her care program. Caroline's diary entries from this time reflected her joy and anticipation for the future. She wrote about her dreams of continuing her work with children and perhaps even starting a small nonprofit organization dedicated to helping foster kids. Caroline's life was a beacon of hope and kindness, making her tragic end all the more shocking and mysterious for everyone who knew her. It was late at night on July 29, 2017, when the peaceful town of Corvallis was jolted by a horrifying discovery. Caroline Stevens' body was found in the backyard of her home. The time was around 10:30 p.m. The person who found her was a neighbor, Lisa Turner. Lisa had come over to return a casserole dish she had borrowed earlier in the week. As she approached the house, she noticed the back gate was open, which was unusual. Lisa decided to check if everything was all right. She walked into the backyard and found Caroline lying on the ground motionless. Caroline's body was partially hidden by the tall garden plants she had lovingly tended. Lisa's first reaction was shock. She dropped the dish and screamed, her voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. She quickly pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking as she tried to explain what she had found. The emergency operator calmed Lisa down and got the necessary details. Lisa described how Caroline looked. She was covered in dirt and there was a rope around her neck. The operator assured Lisa that help was on the way and advised her to stay where she was but not to touch anything. Lisa, still in shock, sat on the back steps, trying to process what she had just seen. When the police and paramedics arrived, they found Lisa visibly shaken but able to give a statement. Officer Joey Martins, one of the first on the scene, described Lisa as pale and trembling, her voice barely a whisper as she recounted the events. The backyard was quickly cordoned off with yellow police tape as investigators began their work. Caroline's body was carefully examined. The medical examiner, Dr. Susan Eng, noted the severe head injuries and the strangulation marks on Caroline's neck. She confirmed that Caroline had been bludgeoned with a tire iron and then strangled with a rope. The scene was gruesome, with blood spatters on the garden pathway and the tire iron lying nearby, partially hidden under a bush. News of the murder spread quickly through Corvallis. People were shocked that something so terrible could happen in their quiet town. Friends and family gathered outside the Stevens home, comforting each other and trying to make sense of the tragedy. Caroline's death was a harsh blow to the community. She was a beloved figure, and the brutality of her murder left everyone in a state of disbelief and fear. The police promised to find out who was responsible for this heinous crime and bring them to justice. The police arrived quickly at the Stevens home on July 29, 2017. By 11:00 p.m., the quiet neighborhood of Corvallis was buzzing with activity. Officer Joey Martinez, along with Detective Linda Salina and Detective Mike Prosper, led the investigation. They were known for their thoroughness and dedication. Detective Salina, a 10-year veteran of the force, was especially known for her keen eye for detail. Detective Prosper, her partner, was equally experienced and meticulous. The crime scene was a mess. Caroline Stevens' body lay in the backyard, surrounded by her garden plants. Blood was splattered on the garden pathway, and a tire iron lay nearby, partially hidden under a bush. The rope around Caroline's neck was still tightly wound. The detectives immediately began to secure the area, putting up yellow police tape to keep curious neighbors and onlookers at a distance. Detective Selena took the lead in examining the body. She noted the severe head injuries and the clear marks of strangulation on Caroline's neck. It was evident that Caroline had been bludgeoned with the tire iron and then strangled with the rope. The brutality of the crime was shocking. Detective Selena carefully documented the scene, taking photographs and making notes. Detective Prosper focused on gathering evidence from the surrounding area. He collected the tire iron and bagged it for forensic analysis. He also took samples of the blood spatter and examined the rope for any potential clues. The backyard was meticulously combed for any signs that might point to the murderer. As the investigation continued, the police used various tools and methods to gather evidence. They brought in a forensic team to dust for fingerprints and collect DNA samples. The tire iron was sent to the lab for analysis to determine if it had any fingerprints or other trace evidence. The rope was also examined for fibers or hairs that might help identify the killer. By the early hours of July 30, the police had gathered a significant amount of evidence from the crime scene. Detective Selena and Detective Prosper reviewed their findings and began to piece together the events that led to Caroline's murder. The brutality of the crime suggested a personal motive, and they knew they had to act quickly to find the murderer before they could strike again. The investigation was just beginning, but the detectives were determined to solve the case and bring justice for Caroline Stevens. The peaceful town of Corvallis was now the center of a major murder investigation, and the police were ready to uncover the truth. The first suspect the police investigated was Dr. Oliver Stevens, Caroline's husband. Dr. Stevens, 55, was an entomologist at Oregon State University. He studied insects and was well known in his field. To the outside world, he seemed like a mild-mannered and hardworking man. However, some in the community found him creepy. Oliver had a reputation for being distant and socially awkward. When the police arrived at Oliver's workplace to question him, he was in his lab, working late as usual. He seemed calm and cooperative. Oliver told the police he had been at work all day and only came home late in the evening. He claimed to have found the house empty and assumed Caroline was out visiting friends. Oliver's alibi was that he had been at the university the entire time, with colleagues who could confirm his presence. Detectives Selena and Prosper interviewed Oliver in the small, cluttered office at the university. Oliver appeared calm but showed little emotion when discussing his wife's death. He described his relationship with Caroline as good and normal. However, the detectives noticed that he avoided making direct eye contact and seemed uncomfortable when they asked about his personal life. The police were particularly interested in Oliver's recent behavior. They discovered that Oliver had married Charmin Briscoe, their former foster daughter, in a small ceremony just 6 days after Caroline's death. This raised so many red flags. Marrying so soon after his wife's brutal murder seemed extremely suspicious and definitely earned him the title of creepiest man in Oregon. Oliver calmly explained that he and Charmin had developed feelings for each other over time and that the marriage was their way to move forward after Caroline's death. The police pressed Oliver on this point, asking if Caroline knew about his relationship with Charmin. Oliver admitted that Caroline had recently become suspicious and had confronted him about it. He claimed that they had argued but insisted he had nothing to do with her death. Oliver's demeanor during the interrogation was mostly calm, but he became visibly nervous when discussing his relationship with Charmin. Detective Selena found Oliver's behavior odd. Marrying so quickly after Caroline's death and his nervousness during the interrogation made him a prime suspect. However, they needed more evidence to link him directly to the murder. They decided to keep a close eye on him and continued to investigate other leads. As the investigation progressed, the detectives hoped to find more clues that would either confirm or dispel their suspicions about Dr. Oliver Stevens. His unusual behavior and rapid remarriage made him a key figure in the case, and the police were determined to uncover the truth. The second suspect the police investigated was Charmin Briscoe, the Stevens' former foster daughter and also Oliver Stevens' new wife. Charmin was 18 years old and had lived with Caroline and Oliver since she was 17. She had a troubled past, growing up with a violent alcoholic father. Despite these hardships, Charman was an academically gifted student and had plans to attend Oregon State University in the fall. The police found Charman packing up the small apartment that Oliver and Caroline had rented for her when she turned 18. Detective Linda Salina and Detective Mike Prosper visited her there to ask questions about Caroline's death. Charman was quiet and reserved during the interview, traits her teachers and peers often mentioned. She appeared deeply affected by the events, but her answers were calm and straightforward. Charman told the detectives about her relationship with Caroline, describing her as a kind and loving mother figure. She said Caroline had always supported her, especially in her academic pursuits. When asked about Oliver, Charman admitted that they had developed feelings for each other and that Oliver had treated her to a lavish dinner at a fancy restaurant for her 18th birthday. It was during this dinner that Oliver confessed his love for her and said Caroline was just a nuisance. The police found it unusual that Charman married Oliver just days after Caroline's death. Charman explained that they were in love and wanted to move on with their lives. She insisted she had no involvement in Caroline's murder and that she had been at home studying on the night of the crime. Her alibi was that she had spent the evening alone, preparing for her upcoming university courses. Detective Salina noticed that Charman's answers were consistent but sensed a lingering fear in her demeanor. Charman seemed genuinely saddened by Caroline's death, but also appeared to be hiding something. The detectives asked Charman about her thoughts on Oliver's behavior after Caroline's death. Charman hesitated but then said Oliver had been supportive and caring, helping her through the difficult time. The police also asked Charman if Caroline knew about her relationship with Oliver. Charman said that Caroline had suspected something but had not confronted her directly. This information, combined with a rapid marriage, made Charman a person of interest. However, without solid evidence linking her to the crime, the detectives had to consider other possibilities. As the interview concluded, the police remained cautious about Charman's involvement. Her relationship with Oliver and her proximity to the Stevens family made her a key figure in the investigation. The detectives decided to monitor her closely while continuing to gather more information. The investigation into Charman Briscoe's role in the case was ongoing, with detectives looking for any clues that could either confirm or disprove her involvement in Caroline Stevens' murder. The third suspect the police investigated was Samuel Manjaro, a 43-year-old refugee from South Sudan. Samuel had moved to America with his 4 children after losing his wife during the Civil War. He found work as a janitor and rented a small apartment in Corvallis. Samuel's connection to the Stevens family came from a dispute with Dr. Oliver Stevens, who was his former landlord. Samuel had been evicted from his apartment by Dr. Stevens just a month before Caroline's death. Oliver had given Samuel and his family very little notice, making room for Charman Briscoe to live there rent-free. This eviction left Samuel and his children homeless for a short period, which caused him significant distress. The police considered Samuel a suspect because he had a motive for holding a grudge against Oliver. Detectives Linda Salina and Mike Prosper went to interview Samuel at his new apartment. Samuel was cooperative but visibly upset about the eviction. He spoke about the challenges of starting a new life in America and the hardship caused by losing his apartment. Samuel described how difficult it had been to find a new place to live while trying to keep his job and take care of his children. During the interview, Samuel appeared calm but frustrated when discussing Dr. Stevens. He admitted he was angry about the eviction but denied any involvement in Caroline's murder. Samuel explained that on the night of the murder, he was at work. His employer confirmed that Samuel had been working his usual night shift as a janitor at a local office building. The police checked Samuel's alibi and found it to be solid. His time card showed he had clocked in and out at the correct times, and security footage confirmed his presence at the building throughout the night. Despite his anger towards Oliver, there was no evidence linking Samuel to the crime scene. Detective Salina noticed that Samuel's main concern was the well-being of his children. He talked about how they were adjusting to life in Corvallis and his hopes for their future. Samuel was a hard-working man trying to provide for his family under challenging circumstances. His focus on his children and his solid alibi made it less likely that he was involved in Caroline's murder. After interviewing Samuel, the detectives concluded that while he had a motive to dislike Oliver, there was no direct evidence tying him to the crime. They decided to keep Samuel in mind, but turned their attention back to other leads that might provide more substantial clues. As the investigation continued, the police were determined to uncover the truth and bring justice to Caroline Stevens. Samuel Manjaro remained a person of interest, But the focus shifted back to the Stevens family and their complex relationships. On August 5, 2017, a week after Caroline Stevens' murder, the police received a crucial piece of new evidence. It was a hot and sunny afternoon when Detective Linda Salina got a call from the forensic lab. The lab had analyzed the tire iron found at the crime scene and discovered fingerprints that didn't belong to Caroline or Oliver. These fingerprints belonged to Charmin Briscoe. The police immediately revisited the Stevens home to gather more evidence. This time, they brought in a specialized team to search for anything that might have been overlooked. Detective Mike Prosper led the team, and they meticulously combed through the house and backyard. They focused on areas where Charmin might have left traces of her presence. During the search, they found a hidden compartment in the garage. Inside, there were several personal items belonging to Charmin, including a notebook. This notebook contained detailed entries about her sexual relationship with Oliver and her growing frustration with Caroline. One entry, dated just days before the murder, expressed anger towards Caroline for being a nasty bleep and mentioned a plan to make that bleep pay. The notebook was a significant find. It provided a direct link between Charmin and the murder. The police also found a pair of gloves in Charmin's apartment, which tested positive for traces of Caroline's blood. This evidence suggested that Charmin had worn the gloves while handling the tire iron, which explained why her fingerprints were only found on the weapon and not at the crime scene. With this new evidence, the police called Charmin in for another round of questioning. This time, they confronted her with the notebook and the blood-stained gloves. Charmin's demeanor changed drastically. She became visibly nervous and struggled to maintain her composure. She initially denied any involvement, but the mounting evidence made it difficult for her to keep her story straight. Charmin eventually broke down and confessed to being present at the crime scene, but insisted that Oliver was the one who had killed Caroline. She claimed that she had tried to stop him, but was too scared to report the crime. Charmin's confession added a new layer to the investigation, indicating that Oliver and Charmin might have been co-conspirators. The police reviewed Charmin's confession and the new evidence carefully. They realized that while Charmin's involvement was now clear, they still needed to determine Oliver's exact role in the murder. The focus of the investigation shifted to proving Oliver's participation and understanding the full extent of their plan. As the investigation progressed, the police were more determined than ever to bring justice for Caroline Stevens. The new evidence provided a clearer picture of what had happened, but the case was far from over. The detectives knew they had to keep pushing to uncover the whole truth. On August 10, 2017, the police felt they had enough evidence to arrest Dr. Oliver Stevens for the murder of his wife, Caroline. Dr. Stevens, 55, was a respected entomologist at Oregon State University, but behind his professional facade, he harbored dark secrets. Oliver had married Charmin Briscoe, their former foster daughter, just 6 days after Caroline's brutal murder, raising many suspicions. Detectives Linda Salina and Mike Prosper reviewed the new evidence carefully. Charmin's confession, the blood-stained gloves, and the notebook entries all pointed towards a conspiracy between Oliver and Charmin. They believed that Oliver orchestrated the murder to be with Charmin without any obstacles. Caroline had recently become suspicious of Oliver's behavior, which likely pushed him to act. On the morning of August 11, the police planned the arrest. They knew Oliver was teaching a class at the university, so they decided to confront him there. At 10:00 a.m., Detectives Salina and Prosper arrived at the campus. They waited outside his lecture hall until he finished his class. As Oliver exited the room, the detectives approached him, identified themselves, and informed him that he was under arrest for the murder of Caroline Stevens. Oliver's reaction was a mix of shock and resignation. He tried to maintain his composure but couldn't hide his surprise. The students and faculty nearby were equally shocked as they watched the arrest unfold. The detectives handcuffed Oliver and read him his rights. He was then escorted to the police car, maintaining a stoic expression throughout the process. Back at the police station, Oliver was formally charged with first-degree murder. During the interrogation, he continued to deny his involvement, claiming that Charmin had acted alone. However, the evidence was overwhelming. The notebook entries, Charmin's confession, and the forensic evidence all painted a clear picture of his guilt. The police believed that Oliver had manipulated Charmin into helping him with his plan, using her troubled past and emotional attachment to him. The detectives continued to piece together the events leading up to the murder. They learned that Oliver had meticulously planned the crime, ensuring that Charman would have an alibi and that evidence would point away from him initially. His cold and calculated approach made the crime even more chilling. With Oliver in custody, the police shifted their focus to preparing for the upcoming trial. They were determined to ensure that both Oliver and Charman would face the consequences of their actions. The arrest was a significant step towards justice for Caroline Stevens, but the case was far from over. The trial for the murder of Caroline Stevens began on November 15, 2017. The courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and members of Caroline's family. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Margaret Ellis, 45, presented a strong case against Dr. Oliver Stevens. Margaret was known for her meticulous approach and her passion for seeking justice. She argued that Oliver had orchestrated the murder to be with Charman Briscoe, their former foster daughter, without any obstacles. The prosecution laid out the evidence in a clear and compelling manner. They presented the notebook entries written by Charman, which detailed her frustrations with Caroline and hinted at a plan to make that bleep pay. They also showed the blood-stained gloves found in Charman's apartment and the forensic analysis that linked them to Caroline's murder. Margaret emphasized Oliver's quick marriage to Charman just days after the murder, portraying it as proof of his motive. The defense, led by attorney Jonathan Ray, 50, faced an uphill battle. Jonathan was a seasoned lawyer known for his calm demeanor and strategic thinking. He argued that Charman acted alone out of jealousy and that Oliver had no part in the crime. The defense attempted to discredit Charman's confession, suggesting that she had been coerced by the police. Jonathan also tried to cast doubt on the forensic evidence, claiming that it was circumstantial and did not directly link Oliver to the murder. Caroline's family watched the trial with a mix of grief and determination. Her brother, David Miller, often spoke to reporters during breaks, expressing hope that justice would be served. The emotional toll on the family was evident as they listened to the details of Caroline's brutal death. After several weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for 2 days. On December 10, 2017, they returned with a verdict. Oliver Stevens was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was tense as the verdict was read. Oliver remained stoic, showing little reaction. Charman, who was also present, broke down in tears. The judge sentenced Oliver to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The severity of the sentence reflected the heinous nature of the crime and the premeditation involved. Charman received a lighter sentence of 25 years for her role in the murder, acknowledging her cooperation with the police. The verdict brought a sense of closure to Caroline's family, though the pain of her loss remained. They felt justice had been served, but the memories of Caroline would always linger. The community of Corvallis was shocked by the events, but many were relieved that the case had been resolved. The trial and its outcome had a profound impact on those involved. Caroline's friends and family found some solace in the verdict, while Oliver and Charman faced the consequences of their actions. The story of Caroline Stevens' murder served as a reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the importance of seeking justice. After the trial, life in Corvallis began to settle into a new normal, though the impact of the case lingered for everyone involved. Dr. Oliver Stevens was serving his life sentence at the Oregon State Penitentiary. The prison, located in Salem, became his new home, where he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Oliver's former colleagues and students at Oregon State University were shocked and saddened by his conviction. The university had to manage the fallout from the scandal, including addressing concerns from students and faculty about their safety and the integrity of their institution. Charman Briscoe, sentenced to 25 years, was transferred to the Coffee Creek Correctional Facility, a women's prison near Wilsonville. Charman's life in prison was difficult. She faced challenges adapting to her new environment and had to cope with the consequences of her actions. The media continued to follow her story, and she became a figure of public interest, often highlighted in local news reports. For the Stevens friends and supporters, the case became a rallying point for greater awareness and support for victims of crime. Various memorials and events were held in Caroline's honor, helping to keep her memory alive and ensure that her legacy of compassion and service continued. As time went on, life in Corvallis gradually returned to its normal pace, but the story of Caroline Stevens and the dramatic events surrounding her murder remained a significant part of the town's history. The trial and its outcome served as a stark reminder of the importance of justice and the impact of crime on individuals and communities alike. Julie Lewis was 18 years old. She lived in Payeth, Idaho, a small town known for its friendly people and beautiful landscapes. Julie was in her senior year of high school and was known for her beauty and intelligence. She dreamed of going to college and starting a new life away from the troubles she faced at home. Julie's life had been tough. Her mother died of cancer when Julie was only 14. This loss left a big hole in her life. Her father, Tony Lewis, was a police officer who worked long hours. Julie often felt lonely and started seeking the company of older men who could offer her the stability and comfort she missed. Some people thought Julie was manipulative, using her looks and charm to get what she wanted. Others believed she was just trying to survive in a world that had not been kind to her. In school, Julie was an honor roll student. Her friends described her as ambitious and determined, always talking about her plans for the future. She wanted to study business at the University of Idaho and one day own her own company. Julie's teachers saw her potential and often praised her hard work and dedication. In the days leading up to her death, Julie was busy preparing for her high school graduation. She bought a new dress for the occasion and was excited about the graduation ceremony. She talked to her friends about their plans for the summer. They planned to visit the local mall, go to the movies, and spend time at the nearby Snake River. Julie also had a part-time job at a local diner where she saved up money for college. She was well-liked by her coworkers and customers for her friendly and outgoing personality. Despite her troubles, Julie tried to stay positive. She had a close-knit group of friends who supported her. They often hung out at local spots like the Payette Skate Park and the community swimming pool. Julie was also involved in her school's drama club, where she enjoyed acting and working behind the scenes. Julie's dreams were big, but her life was cut short. She had plans and ambitions, but she never got the chance to see them through. Her death shocked the small town of Payette, leaving everyone wondering what could have been. On the morning of June 5, 2012, Tony Lewis came home after his night shift as a police officer. Comey expected to find his daughter Julie still asleep. Instead, he found a horrifying scene. Julie's lifeless body was on the floor of her bedroom. The room was in disarray, with items scattered everywhere. Julie had been brutally attacked. She was bludgeoned with a rock from outside their home and then strangled with a belt. Tony was shocked and devastated. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Fighting through his grief and panic, Tony called 911 to report the crime. His voice trembled as he told the dispatcher what had happened. Despite his training and experience as a police officer, nothing could have prepared him for this. The news of Julie's murder spread quickly through the small town of Payette. Payette hadn't seen a murder in over 20 years, and the community was in shock. Julie was well known and liked by many. Her death was a terrible blow to the town. When the first responders arrived, they found Tommy outside, distraught and in tears. The sight inside Julie's room was gruesome. Blood was spattered on the walls, and the signs of a struggle were clear. Julie's face was bruised, and there were ulcers around her neck from the belt used to strangle her. The rock used in the attack lay nearby, covered in blood. The paramedics pronounced Julie dead at the scene. Tony could only watch in despair as they did their job. He was overwhelmed with grief, unable to comprehend how someone could do this to his daughter. Neighbors started to gather outside the Lewis home, drawn by the flashing lights of the police cars and ambulances. They whispered among themselves, trying to understand what had happened. Reporters from local news outlets soon arrived, their cameras and microphones capturing the tragic scene. They interviewed some of the neighbors, who spoke of their shock and sadness. Julie's friends and classmates were devastated by the news. Many of them had seen her just the day before at school, laughing and talking about their future plans. Now those plans would never come true. The school counselors were brought in to help the students cope with their grief. The entire town mourned the loss of a bright, young life taken too soon. The police arrived quickly at the Lewis home on the morning of June 5, 2012. Leading the investigation was Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts, a seasoned investigator known for her thoroughness and dedication. She had solved many tough cases in her career and was determined to find justice for Julie. The crime scene was horrific. Julie's bedroom was in chaos, with items strewn everywhere. Blood spattered the walls and signs of a violent struggle were evident. Julie's body lay on the floor, her face bruised and neck, marked from the belt used to strangle her. The rock used to bludgeon her lay nearby, covered in blood. Detective Roberts and her team began their meticulous work. Detective Roberts, along with Officer Olson Benson, a local officer with 15 years on the force, started by securing the area to prevent contamination of evidence. They took photos of the entire scene, capturing every detail. They used luminol to detect any hidden bloodstains and collected fingerprints from various surfaces. The investigators also bagged the rock and belt as key pieces of evidence. Detective Roberts noticed several things right away. The window in Julie's room was slightly open, suggesting someone might have entered or exited through it. There were scratches on the windowsill, possibly from the killer climbing in or out. Outside, footprints in the garden soil indicated someone had recently been there. The team interviewed Tony Lewis, who was still in shock. He recounted finding Julie and calling 911. His grief was palpable, and Detective Roberts felt his pain as a father. Despite his emotional state, Tony provided all the information he could, hoping it would help catch his daughter's killer. The local news outlets, including the Payette Times, covered the story extensively. Reporters interviewed residents and followed every development closely. The town was gripped by fear and sadness, unable to believe such a brutal crime could happen in their peaceful community. As the investigation continued, Detective Roberts and her team worked tirelessly. They analyzed the evidence collected, hoping to find clues that would lead them to the murderer. They checked for any connections Julie might have had with known criminals and looked into her recent activities. The community's support for the police was strong. People brought food and coffee to the officers working long hours. Local businesses put up posters offering rewards for information leading to the arrest of Julie's killer. The town of Payette, once quiet and serene, now united in their quest for justice. The first suspect the police investigated was Harold Henderson. Harold, aged 70, was a retired used car salesman who lived in Payette. He was well known in the town for his flashy personality and competitive nature. Despite his age, Harold had a reputation for being charming and wealthy, making him popular in the local social scene. He was a widower, living alone in a large house filled with memorabilia from his younger days. Harold's connection to Julie Lewis came to light quickly. It was discovered that he had been romantically involved with Julie. Some residents of Payette knew about their relationship and whispered about the odd pairing. Harold's interest in Julie raised eyebrows, but in a small town, people often keep secrets. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts and Officer Olson Benson brought Harold in for questioning on June 6, 2012. They wanted to understand the nature of his relationship with Julie and determine if he had a motive for her murder. Harold arrived at the police station dressed neatly, his demeanor calm but slightly defensive. During the interrogation, Harold admitted to his relationship with Julie but denied any involvement in her death. He claimed they had a consensual sexual relationship, started only after she turned 18, and that he cared deeply for her. However, Harold's competitive streak, especially with his twin brother Alan, suggested a possible motive. Harold and Alan had a long history of rivalry, and both had been vying for Julie's attention. Harold's calm and confident demeanor began to waver as Detective Roberts pressed him on his whereabouts on the night of the murder. Harold stated he was at home, watching a rerun of NCIS on CBS. He insisted he had no reason to harm Julie and was shocked by her death. However, his answers were vague, and he couldn't provide a solid alibi. The police also investigated Harold's financial records. They found that he had been giving Julie money regularly, which could have been a source of tension if he discovered she was manipulating him. Harold's phone record showed multiple calls and messages to Julie in the days leading up to her death, indicating frequent communication. Despite his denials, the police felt Harold had the motive and opportunity to commit the crime. His history of competitiveness with Alan and his romantic involvement with Julie painted a troubling picture. The investigators kept a close eye on Harold, looking for any inconsistencies in his story and waiting for any evidence that might link him directly to the murder. As the investigation continued, Harold remained a prime suspect. His flamboyant personality and competitive nature, coupled with his involvement with Julie, made him a central figure in the case. The town of Payette watched closely as the police worked to uncover the truth behind Julie's tragic death. The second suspect in the investigation was Alan Henderson, Harold's twin brother. Alan, also 70 years old, was a retired high school history teacher. Known for his intellect and passion for teaching, Alan was respected and well-liked in Payette. He had a reputation for being level-headed and scholarly, a stark contrast to his more flamboyant brother. Alan had never married and was often seen as a bachelor who enjoyed his solitude. He spent much of his time reading and participating in community events. Despite his age, Alan had a magnetic personality that attracted people of all ages. He was particularly fond of attending local book clubs and giving lectures at the town library. The police discovered that Alan, like his brother, had also been romantically involved with Julie Lewis. This revelation shocked many in the town, as Alan was viewed as a more reserved and dignified figure. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts and Officer Olson Benson brought Alan in for questioning on June 7, 2012, to understand his relationship with Julie and his potential motives. Alan arrived at the police station looking composed, dressed in a tweed jacket that hinted at his scholarly background. During the interrogation, he admitted to his relationship with Julie, but insisted it was platonic. He explained that he enjoyed her company and found her bright and ambitious. Alan's affection for Julie was evident, but he denied any romantic involvement. Detective Roberts pressed Alan about his whereabouts on the night of Julie's murder. Alan stated he was at home, working on a lecture for the local historical society. He mentioned reading a book about the Civil War, a topic he was passionate about. However, his alibi was weak, as he lived alone and had no witnesses to confirm his story. Alan's demeanor during the interrogation was calm but saddened. He expressed disbelief that Julie could be dead. He cooperated fully with the police, providing them with his phone records and access to his home. The investigators found nothing suspicious at his residence, but they continued to scrutinize his interactions with Julie. The police also interviewed people who knew Alan. His colleagues and former students spoke highly of him, describing him as a dedicated teacher who cared deeply about education. Despite his calm exterior, the possibility of betrayal by Julie could have triggered a strong emotional response. As the investigation progressed, Alan remained a key suspect. His scholarly nature and apparent innocence contrasted sharply with the dark motives uncovered. The police continued to explore every lead, determined to uncover the truth behind Julie's murder and the Henderson brothers' involvement. The third suspect in Julie Lewis' murder investigation was her father, Tony Lewis. Tony, 45, was a police officer in Payette, Idaho. Known for his protective nature, Tony was a well-liked figure in the community. He had become close to the Henderson brothers over the years, often acting as a mediator between the two. Tony's connection to Julie was evident, as he was her father and lived next door to Alan Henderson. The police had to consider every possibility, even the uncomfortable one that Tony might be involved. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts and Officer Olson Benson decided to question Tony on June 8, 2012. Tony was still reeling from the shock of finding his daughter's body. When he arrived at the police station, he looked tired and grief-stricken. During the interrogation, Tony recounted his actions on the night of the murder. He had been working a night shift, which he often did to provide for Julie after the death of her mother. Tony insisted he had no reason to harm his daughter and was devastated by her death. Detective Roberts asked Tony about his relationship with the Henderson brothers. Tony admitted he knew about their interest in Julie and had tried to keep the peace between them. He expressed his frustration over their rivalry, which had caused tension in the neighborhood. Despite this, Tony was adamant that he had no involvement in the crime. The police looked into Tony's background and found no history of violence or misconduct. His colleagues at the police department spoke highly of him, describing him as a dedicated officer and loving father. However, the investigators had to consider the possibility that Tony's protective instincts might have driven him to a breaking point. Tony provided his phone records and cooperated fully with the investigation. The record showed he had been on duty at the time of the murder, but the police needed to verify this alibi thoroughly. They checked surveillance footage from the police station and confirmed Tony's presence there during the critical hours. The police also interviewed neighbors and friends of Tony. Most described him as a caring father who was deeply affected by his wife's death and determined to give Julie a better life. Some, however, mentioned that Tony had become more stressed and irritable in recent months, possibly due to the pressure of raising a teenager alone. Despite Tony's grief and cooperation, the police had to keep all possibilities open. His close proximity to the crime scene and his protective nature were significant factors in the investigation. Detective Roberts and her team continued to examine every piece of evidence, knowing that solving the case required looking at every angle, no matter how painful. As the investigation unfolded, Tony remained under scrutiny. The small town of Payette watched closely, hoping for answers and justice for Julie. The police were determined to find the truth, and Tony's involvement, if any, would be uncovered through their relentless efforts. On June 10, 2012, around 3:00 p.m., new evidence came to light. The weather was warm and sunny, typical for Payette in early summer. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts received the call from a local hiker who had found something unusual near the Snake River. He had been walking his dog when he noticed a small bag hidden under some rocks. Detective Roberts and Officer Olsen Benson rushed to the scene. They found a small black bag containing a blood-stained shirt and a pair of gloves. The items were immediately taken into evidence. The police believed these items could be crucial in solving Julie's murder. Back at the station, the forensic team examined the evidence. The blood on the shirt matched Julie's. This was a significant breakthrough. The gloves were tested for fingerprints, and the results came back with a match to Harold Henderson. This finding shifted the focus back to Harold, who had previously denied being near the crime scene. Detective Roberts and her team re-examined Harold's alibi. They discovered inconsistencies in his story. Further analysis of his phone records showed he had been near Julie's house at the time of the murder, contradicting his claim of being at home watching TV. The new evidence prompted the police to search Harold's home again. This time, they found a hidden compartment in his garage with several items that raised suspicion, including a second pair of gloves and a belt similar to the one used to strangle Julie. These discoveries painted a clearer picture of Harold's involvement. As the investigation deepened, the police interviewed more witnesses. They found out that Harold had been seen arguing with Julie the day before her death. A neighbor, Mrs. Carter, reported hearing raised voices and seeing Harold leave Julie's house looking angry. With the new evidence, Detective Roberts felt confident they were closing in on the truth. The police brought Harold in for another round of questioning. This time, his demeanor was less confident. Confronted with the evidence, Harold became defensive and struggled to maintain his earlier calmness. The forensic team continued to analyze the evidence, looking for any additional clues. They used advanced techniques like DNA testing and fiber analysis to ensure nothing was overlooked. The detailed investigation paid off, as more links between Harold and the crime were uncovered. By the end of the week, the police were confident they had enough evidence to make an arrest. The discovery of the bag near the Snake River had been the breakthrough they needed. The town of Payette waited anxiously for justice to be served. On June 12, 2012, the police were ready to make an arrest. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts had pieced together the evidence pointing to Harold Henderson as the murderer. Harold, 70, was a retired used car salesman known for his flamboyant personality and competitive nature. His charm and wealth made him a popular figure in Payette, but his rivalry with his twin brother Alan and romantic involvement with Julie Lewis revealed a darker side. Harold had been competing with Alan for Julie's affection. He had given Julie money regularly and felt betrayed when he discovered her plan to blackmail him and Alan. On the night of June 4, Harold confronted Julie at her home. The argument turned violent, leading Harold to bludgeon her with a rock he found outside and strangle her with a belt. Driven by anger and betrayal, Harold committed the brutal murder. Detective Roberts had discovered inconsistencies in Harold's alibi and found crucial evidence, like the blood-stained shirt and gloves, linking him to the crime. The DNA and fingerprints on the gloves match Harold's, and the blood on the shirt was Julie's. Surveillance footage also placed Harold near Julie's house at the time of the murder. On the morning of June 12, Detective Roberts and Officer Olsen Benson went to Harold's house to arrest him. They arrived at 9:00 a.m., and Harold was at home. When they told him he was under arrest for Julie's murder, Harold looked shocked but didn't resist. He was handcuffed and taken to the police station. At the station, Harold was formally charged with murder. His reaction was one of disbelief and anger. He insisted he was innocent, claiming the evidence was planted. Despite his protests, the overwhelming evidence convinced the police of his guilt. Julie's father, Tony Lewis, was informed about the arrest. He was devastated but relieved that the police had found the person responsible for his daughter's death. The town of Payette, which had been closely following the investigation, felt a mix of shock and relief. They couldn't believe someone they knew so well could commit such a heinous crime. As Harold was taken into custody, the town hoped for justice for Julie. Her friends and family gathered to support each other, remembering Julie for her beauty, intelligence, and dreams of a better future. The arrest brought some closure, but the pain of losing Julie would remain with them forever. The evidence against Harold was strong, and the police were confident they had the right person. The case now moved to the courts, where Harold would face trial for his actions. The community waited anxiously for the trial, hoping for a verdict that would bring justice for Julie. Harold Henderson's trial began on July 15, 2012, in Payette County Court. The courtroom was filled with Julie Lewis' family and local residents eager to see justice served. The case received extensive coverage from local news outlets, including the Payette Times and KTVB Channel 7, which kept the community updated on the trial's progress. The prosecutor, Emily Hackle Matchwork, 38, was known for her strong courtroom presence and dedication to seeking justice. Hackle Matchwork argued that Harold Henderson was guilty of brutally murdering Julie Lewis. She presented a clear case, showing evidence such as the blood-stained shirt and gloves found near the Snake River, Harold's fingerprints on the murder weapon, and surveillance footage placing him at Julie's house on the night of the crime. Hackle Matchwork described the crime as an act of rage and betrayal, emphasizing how Harold's rivalry with his twin brother and his manipulative behavior towards Julie led to her tragic death. The defense attorney, Drew Nils, 45, was a respected lawyer with a reputation for defending high-profile cases. Nils argued that the evidence against Harold was circumstantial and that his client was being falsely accused. He suggested that Harold's emotional state and previous arguments with Julie did not prove guilt. Mills attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's evidence, arguing that it was possible someone else could have committed the murder. Julie's family attended the trial every day. Her father, Tony Lewis, appeared exhausted but resolute. He was seen comforting Julie's friends and family, who were deeply affected by the trial. The emotional weight of the case was evident as testimonies about Julie's life and dreams were presented in court. After several weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated and reached a verdict on August 5, 2012. Harold Henderson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict was met with a mixture of relief and sorrow from the courtroom. Julie's family, while devastated by her loss, felt the sense of justice had been achieved. Sentencing took place on August 12, 2012. Harold was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, Honorable David Thompson, stated that the crime was particularly heinous due to its brutality and the betrayal involved. The sentence was seen by many as a fitting punishment for the crime. The trial's conclusion had a profound impact on the community. Payette, a town that had not seen such a violent crime in years, was left to heal. Julie's friends and family continued to honor her memory, focusing on her dreams and aspirations rather than the tragic end of her life. The case served as a stark reminder of the impact of violence and the importance of justice in a close-knit community. After Harold Henderson's trial and sentencing, life in Payette, Idaho, began to slowly return to normal. The town had been deeply affected by Julie Lewis' murder and the dramatic court case that followed. Payette, known for its close-knit community and small-town charm, was shaken by the violence and the betrayal that came to light. Julie's father, Tony Lewis, continued to cope with the loss of his daughter. He took a leave of absence from his job as a police officer to focus on his grief and to support Julie's memory. Tony began speaking at local schools about the importance of communication and the dangers of manipulation, hoping to prevent similar tragedies in the future. His efforts were met with support from the community, who admired his strength and resilience. Harold Henderson's life took a dramatic turn after his conviction. He was transferred to the Idaho State Penitentiary, where he began serving his life sentence. Harold's high-profile case and the nature of his crime made him a notable inmate, but he kept a low profile in prison. His flamboyant personality and competitive nature were replaced by a more subdued and reflective demeanor. The prison system provided Harold with counseling, but it did little to ease the weight of his actions. Alan Henderson, Harold's twin brother, also had to deal with the aftermath. Though he was cleared of any involvement in Julie's murder, the case had taken a toll on him emotionally. Alan withdrew from the social scene and focused on personal reflection. He continued to live in Payette, where he was known for his quiet and reserved nature. The community remained supportive of Alan, understanding that he had been a victim of his brother's actions as much as Julie's family had been. As time passed, Payette slowly moved forward. The town's recovery was marked by a sense of healing and unity, with residents coming together to support one another. The memory of Julie Lewis lived on through the scholarship and charity events, reminding everyone of her life and the impact of her tragic death. Today, we explore the life and tragic death of a stay-at-home mom who found herself at the center of a tangled web of secrets, desires, and betrayal, a web that ultimately led to her untimely demise. Tina Bolland was a 42-year-old stay-at-home mom who lived in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. She was well known in her community as a friendly and sociable woman who was always willing to lend a helping hand. Tina was the kind of neighbor who remembered birthdays, organized block parties, and never missed a chance to volunteer at her children's school events. She lived with her husband, Michael Bolland, a 46-year-old insurance agent, and their two teenage children aged 16 and 15. In April 2014, Tina was at the peak of her involvement in the neighborhood. Tina was often seen driving her kids to practice in her blue Honda Odyssey, stopping by the local Starbucks for a caramel macchiato on the way. She was also active in her church, where she helped coordinate charity drives and bake sales. But Tina's life had another side, one that few knew about. Beneath her outward appearance as a devoted wife and mother, Tina was involved in a series of secret sexual relationships with other women in her community. These relationships were kept hidden from her family and most of her other friends. Tina was the belle of the ball in this secret circle, engaging in passionate sexual affairs with approximately a half-dozen other stay-at-home moms in her neighborhood. She enjoyed the thrill of these relationships, which gave her a sense of excitement and freedom that she didn't find in her bland suburban life. In the days leading up to her death, Tina was particularly excited about her new relationship with Hope Johnson, a 45-year-old woman who had recently moved into the neighborhood. Tina's friends noticed that she seemed happier than usual, but they had no idea of the secret life she was living. This hidden world, filled with desire and jealousy, would soon lead to a tragedy that would shock the entire community. On the morning of April 15, 2014, at approximately 8:30 a.m., Tina Bollen's lifeless body was discovered at the bottom of the stairs in her home in Rio Rancho of New Mexico. It was a typical spring morning, with the sun shining brightly and the sound of birds chirping in the trees outside. The discovery was made by Lisa De Angelis, Tina's close friend and neighbor, who had come over after not receiving any responses to her text and calls the night before. Lisa and Tina had a strong bond, often meeting up at the local Panera Bread for coffee and catching up on the latest gossip. That morning, when Lisa arrived at Tina's house, she noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. Concerned, she called out Tina's name as she stepped inside, but there was no response. As she walked further into the house, her heart began to race. The house was eerily quiet, with the faint sound of the TV playing in the background. When Lisa reached the staircase, she was met with a sight that would haunt her forever. Tina was lying at the bottom of the stairs, her body twisted in an unnatural position. She was wearing a light blue nightgown, and her hair was matted with blood from a cut on her lip. Lisa froze in shock, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. After a few moments, Lisa snapped out of her daze and frantically dialed 911. Her voice trembled as she spoke to the operator, trying to explain what she had found. The 911 operator remained calm, asking Lisa to stay on the line until help arrived. Lisa could hardly keep her composure as she paced back and forth, her eyes never leaving Tina's motionless body. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air as emergency responders arrived at the scene. Lisa was visibly shaken as paramedics rushed into the house. She stepped aside to let them work, her hands trembling as she watched them assess Tina's condition. Despite their efforts, it was clear that Tina was already gone. The paramedics confirmed that Tina was dead, and Lisa collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. The tragedy of Tina Bollen's death had just begun to unfold, leaving a community in shock and searching for answers. The Rio Rancho Police Department arrived quickly at Tina Bollen's home on April 15, 2014, around 8:45 a.m., just minutes after Lisa De Angelis called 911. The first officers on the scene were Detective Martina Lopez, a seasoned investigator known for her sharp instincts, and Officer James Carson, a young patrolman with 2 years on the force. As they entered the house, they were met with the unsettling sight of Tina's body at the bottom of the stairs. Detective Lopez immediately took charge, instructing Officer Carson to secure the scene and make sure no one else entered the home. The staircase where Tina was found was carpeted with beige walls that showed no signs of a struggle. Tina's body was lying in a twisted position, her head turned awkwardly to the side. A small pool of blood had formed under her head, but the scene was relatively clean, with no obvious signs of a violent altercation. The detective carefully examined the area around Tina's body. The staircase was steep, with wooden railings that seemed solid and well-maintained. Lopez noted that Tina was barefoot, and there was a noticeable absence of anything that could have caused her to trip. The nightgown Tina was wearing was slightly torn at the hem, but there were no visible signs of a fight. As she continued her inspection, Lopez's eyes were drawn to a few details that seemed out of place. Tina's phone was found halfway down the stairs, its screen cracked, as if it had been dropped during a fall. But there was something odd about the position of Tina's body. It didn't match the typical pattern seen in accidental falls. The angle at which she had landed raised immediate red flags for the detective. The paramedics who had already confirmed Tina's death stepped back as the police continued their investigation. Detective Lopez ordered a full forensic sweep of the house. She wanted to ensure that every possible piece of evidence was collected. Bettine used luminol to check for any hidden traces of blood, and fingerprint powder was dusted on the stair railings and nearby surfaces. As Lopez observed the scene, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. Her instincts told her that Tina's death might not be the tragic accident it first appeared to be. The lack of defensive wounds, the strange position of the body, and the eerie stillness of the house all pointed to something more sinister. With this in mind, the investigation would move forward with a closer look at those closest to Tina, beginning with her husband and her friends. Lisa De Angelis, 39, was the first person police turned to in their investigation. Known in the neighborhood as a nurturing and caring individual, Lisa had a reputation for being a devoted friend, especially to Tina Boland. They were often seen together at local spots like Panera Bread, and their children played together frequently. But as the police began to dig deeper, they uncovered a relationship between Lisa and Tina that went far beyond friendship. During her initial interrogation, Lisa appeared shaken but cooperative. Detective Martina Lopez, who was leading the investigation, noted Lisa's nervousness. She fidgeted constantly, her hands trembling as she answered questions. At first, Lisa described her friendship with Tina in typical terms, talking about their shared activities and the closeness they had developed over the years. However, as the questioning continued, it became clear that there was much more to their relationship. Under pressure, Lisa admitted that she and Tina had been involved in a secret sexual relationship for several months. The revelation stunned the detectives. Lisa described the relationship as passionate but complicated. Tina had confided in her, revealing that she was unhappy in her marriage and found comfort and excitement in their affair, and that Lisa made her feel like, quote, a Disney princess. But recently, things had taken a turn for the worse. Lisa explained that Tina had started to pull away from her, becoming increasingly distant. Tina had met a new neighbor, Hope Johnson, and had quickly developed a sexual relationship with her. Lisa confessed that she felt jealous and hurt, and she and Tina had argued about it several times, especially after Lisa had caught Hope and Tina having sex in her daughter's bed. Just a few days before Tina's death, Lisa had confronted her, telling Tina that she couldn't continue their relationship as she was seeing someone else. The police were intrigued by Lisa's admission. Jealousy was a powerful motive, and Lisa's emotional state raised suspicions. But when asked directly if she had anything to do with Tina's death, Lisa firmly denied it. She claimed that their argument was heated, but not violent. According to Lisa, she left Tina's house that evening upset, but never imagined it would be the last time she saw her friend alive. Lisa's interrogation left detectives with more questions than answers. Her jealousy was evident, and her connection to Tina placed her squarely under the microscope. But without concrete evidence, they couldn't make an arrest. The investigation would have to continue, with detectives looking closely at the other people in Tina's life who might have had a reason to harm her. Hope Johnson, 45, was the second person the police turned to in their investigation. Hope had recently moved to Rio Rancho from Atlanta, Georgia, just 6 months prior to Tina Boland's death. On the surface, Hope appeared to be a polished and professional woman. She was a real estate agent known for her sharp business acumen and poised demeanor. Her arrival in the neighborhood had caused a bit of a stir, with many of the local moms curious about the new resident. Hope's relationship with Tina had developed quickly. Neighbors noticed that the two women were often together, sharing private moments at local spots like the Starbucks on Southern Boulevard. They frequently texted each other, and there were whispers that their relationship might be more than just friendship. When Detective Martina Lopez questioned Hope, she maintained a calm and composed exterior, but there was an underlying tension that the detective couldn't ignore. Hope initially downplayed her relationship with Tina, describing it as a friendly connection formed through shared interests and neighborhood activities. However, when pressed, Hope admitted that their relationship had become intimate. Hope described Tina as someone who was charming and fun to be around, but also very persistent. She claimed that Tina had made the first move, DM her naked pictures, and suggesting they take their friendship to, quote, a place beyond your wildest dreams. At first, Hope was hesitant, knowing that Tina was married, but eventually, she gave in to the excitement of their secret affair. Despite the close bond they shared, Hope insisted that she had no reason to harm Tina. She revealed that Tina had recently begun expressing more serious feelings for her, even hinting at leaving her husband. Michael to be with her. But this level of commitment made Hope uncomfortable. She had only just settled into the neighborhood and was dealing with her own marital issues. The last thing she wanted was to be entangled in a scandal. Hope's calm demeanor began to crack when detectives asked about the night of Tina's death. Hope claimed she was at home with her husband, but there was something in her voice that made the detectives doubt her story. Text messages retrieved from Tina's phone showed that Hope and Tina had been in contact late into the evening, and some of the messages suggested tension between them. There were even videos of the two having sex, which Hope had shared with other soccer moms in a way that flaunted their relationship. Though Hope denied any involvement in Tina's death, her connection to the victim and the underlying jealousy she harbored made her a key suspect in the investigation. The police would need more evidence to either confirm or clear her of suspicion. Michael Boland, 46, was the third person the police focused on in their investigation. As Tina Boland's husband, Michael was naturally a person of interest. Michael worked as an insurance agent, a job that kept him busy and often on the road. Neighbors described him as a quiet and somewhat distant figure, rarely seen at community events or social gatherings. He seemed to prefer spending his time away from home. And it was common knowledge that his relationship with Tina had been strained for years. When Detective Martina Lopez and her team interviewed Michael, he appeared stoic and detached, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil surrounding Tina's death. He admitted that his marriage to Tina had been rocky for some time. They had grown apart, with Michael spending more and more time on business trips or simply avoiding being at home. "I needed to get away from that awful woman," Michael said during the interview, his words carrying a bitterness that raised red flags for the detectives. Michael claimed he had no idea about Tina's secret sexual relationships with other women. He insisted that he was completely unaware of her affair with Lisa DeAngelis and was shocked to learn about her involvement with Hope Johnson. However, the detectives couldn't help but wonder if Michael's ignorance was genuine or if he was hiding something. The night of Tina's death, Michael told the police he had been out of town on a business trip in Los Angeles. He provided the names of colleagues who could verify his whereabouts, and at first glance, his alibi seemed solid. But there was something about Michael's demeanor that didn't sit right with the detectives. He was too calm, too measured, and his lack of visible grief made them suspicious. The investigation into Michael's possible motive revealed that he had a lot to lose if his marriage to Tina ended in divorce. Tina had inherited a significant amount of money from her parents, and if they divorced, Michael would likely lose access to that wealth. Moreover, there were rumors that Michael had been seeing other women and even some men during his frequent business trips, adding another layer of complexity to the case. Despite a strong alibi, Michael remained on the police's radar. His distant relationship with Tina, his financial concerns, and his possible infidelity all pointed to a potential motive. The detectives knew they needed to dig deeper into Michael's life and alibi before they could rule him out as a suspect. On April 18, 2014, 3 days after Tina Boland's death, a significant breakthrough came in the form of new evidence. It was a cool, overcast morning in Rio Rancho, and Detective Martina Lopez was reviewing the case files when she received a call from the forensic team. They had discovered something unusual in Tina's home, a small but telling detail that had initially been overlooked. The new evidence was a scuff mark on the wall near the bottom of the stairs where Tina had been found. The mark was faint, but it suggested that something, or someone, had made contact with the wall during the fall. Forensic experts used advanced techniques, including 3D imaging, to analyze the mark. They concluded that it was consistent with the sole of a shoe, indicating that Tina might have been pushed or tripped rather than having fallen accidentally. This discovery was a turning point in the investigation. The scuff mark suggested foul play, and Detective Lopez knew they had to revisit the crime scene with fresh eyes. The forensic team also found traces of skin cells under Tina's fingernails, which were sent to the lab for DNA analysis. This led the police to consider that Tina might have fought back against her attacker. With this new evidence, the detectives intensified their focus on the three main suspects: Lisa DeAngelis, Hope Johnson, and Michael Boland. They brought each of them back in for further questioning, this time armed with the knowledge that Tina's death was likely no accident. The discovery of the scuff mark and the DNA evidence under Tina's nails suggested that she had struggled with someone before her fatal fall. The police also re-examined the text messages on Tina's phone, paying closer attention to the exchanges she had with Lisa and Hope in the hours leading up to her death. The messages hinted at tension and jealousy, particularly between Tina and Lisa. These messages, combined with the new physical evidence, pointed to a possible confrontation. As the investigation progressed, Detective Lopez felt they were closing in on the truth. The new evidence gave the team a clearer picture of what might have happened that night. Tina's death was beginning to look less like a tragic accident and more like the result of a heated altercation. The police were determined to find out who was responsible, knowing that the scuff mark on the wall and the DNA under Tina's nails could be the key to solving the case. On April 20, 2014, the investigation into Tina Boland's death took a decisive turn. The DNA analysis from the skin cells found under Tina's fingernails came back with a match: Lisa DeAngelis. This discovery, combined with the scuff mark on the wall near the stairs, led Detective Martina Lopez to believe that Tina's death was not an accident, but a homicide. Lisa DeAngelis, 39, was a stay-at-home mom known for her nurturing personality. However, beneath her calm exterior, she harbored deep insecurities and fears of losing the people she loved. Tina Boland was at the center of these fears. While their sexual relationship had been the most passionate one of their lives, it was also fraught with jealousy and tension. When Tina started having sex with her new neighbor, Hoke Johnson, Lisa felt threatened and betrayed. On the night of April 15, 2014, Tina and Lisa had a heated argument at Tina's home after Lisa caught Hope and Tina having sex. The argument escalated quickly, with emotions running high. Lisa, in a fit of jealousy and desperation, pushed Tina during the argument. The push caused Tina to lose her balance and fall down the stairs, hitting her head on the way down. The scuff mark on the wall was from Tina's shoe as she tried to regain her balance. The detectives pieced together that Tina had fought back, scratching Lisa in the process, which explained the skin cells under Tina's nails. After realizing what had happened, Lisa panicked. She left the scene, hoping the fall would be ruled an accident, but the physical evidence told a different story. On the morning of April 21, 2014, the police moved to arrest Lisa DeAngelis. Detective Lopez, along with a team of officers, arrived at Lisa's home. Lisa was visibly shaken when the police informed her that she was under arrest for the murder of Tina Boland. She didn't resist but appeared in shock, as if the reality of her actions had only just hit her. As she was led away in handcuffs, Lisa muttered that she never meant to hurt Tina. She just wanted her back. The arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Tina's family, especially her husband Michael, was devastated by the news. They had lost a wife and mother, and now they had to come to terms with the fact that her death was the result of a senseless act of jealousy. Michael, who had been cleared of any wrongdoing, expressed his disbelief that someone so close to Tina could do something so terrible. The trial of Lisa DeAngelis for the murder of Tina Boland began in late October 2014 at the Sandoval County Courthouse. The case had garnered significant media attention, with local news outlets like KRQE and the Albuquerque Journal covering every development. The courtroom was packed with spectators, including many of Tina's friends and family members who were eager to see justice served. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney James Wallace, a 45-year-old seasoned prosecutor known for his tenacity in the courtroom. Wallace argued that Lisa DeAngelis had acted out of intense jealousy, leading her to push Tina down the stairs during a heated argument. He presented the physical evidence, including the scuff mark on the wall and the DNA analysis of the skin cells found under Tina's fingernails. Wallace emphasized that Tina's death was not an accident, but the result of a deliberate act of violence. On the other side, the defense was handled by public defender Karen Michalowski, a 38-year-old attorney known for a compassionate approach to her clients. Michalowski argued that Lisa's actions were not premeditated and that the push was a result of an emotional outburst rather than an intent to kill. She portrayed Lisa as a woman who was deeply in love with Tina and had simply lost control in a moment of overwhelming emotion. Michalowski pleaded with the jury to consider Lisa's remorse and the fact that she had no prior history of violence. Throughout the trial, Tina's family watched with a mix of grief and anger. Michael Boland, Tina's husband, struggled to hold back tears as he listened to the details of his wife's final moments. The impact of Tina's death on her family was clear, and their presence in the courtroom served as a reminder of the real human cost of the crime. After several days of testimony and evidence presentation, the jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a verdict. On November 3, 2014, Lisa DeAngelis was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to 20 years in prison, a sentence that many in the courtroom felt was too lenient given the circumstances. The verdict brought some closure to Tina's family, But the pain of losing her would never fully heal. For Lisa, the sentence marked the beginning of a long journey of reflection and regret. The trial and its outcome left a lasting impact on the Rio Rancho community, a stark reminder of how quickly love can turn to tragedy. After the trial, life in Rio Rancho slowly returned to normal, but the community was forever changed by the events surrounding Tina Boland's death. For Tina's family, the aftermath was a mix of sorrow and adjustment. Michael Boland, now a single parent, focused on rebuilding his life and caring for his children. He continued working as an insurance agent, but his once quiet demeanor became even more reserved. Michael found solace in his work and spending time with his children, who were struggling to cope with the loss of their mother. Lisa DeAngelis, after being convicted of second-degree murder, began serving her 20-year sentence at the New Mexico Women's Correctional Facility. Her life in prison was marked by isolation and reflection. The once active community member now faced a daily routine behind bars. Lisa's trial and conviction were covered extensively by local news outlets like KORQB, and her case became a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked jealousy and emotional turmoil. For Hope Johnson, the new neighbor who had been a suspect in the case, life went on with a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. She moved away from Rio Rancho shortly after the trial concluded, seeking a fresh start in a new city. Her reputation in the neighborhood had been tarnished, despite being cleared of any wrongdoing, and she felt it was best to leave behind the memories of the past year. The impact of Tina Boland's death and Lisa DeAngelis' trial extended beyond the immediate circle of those involved. It served as a sobering reminder of how personal relationships and emotional conflicts can escalate into devastating outcomes. The case highlighted the importance of addressing and managing emotional issues before they spiral out of control, leaving a lasting mark on the community and those who lived through it. Carol McMillan was a 48-year-old with big dreams and a loving family in Shaker Heights, Ohio. She was well known in the community for her friendly nature and warm smile. Carol was the kind of person who would always stop to chat with neighbors and was happy to lend a hand when needed. She was active in the local community, often volunteering at church events and organizing neighborhood barbecues. Carol's friendly nature made her well-liked by everyone she met. Carol lived in a charming, two-story home on a tree-lined street in Shaker Heights, a suburb of Cleveland known for its beautiful architecture and strong sense of community. Shaker Heights is often described as having a boho chic vibe, with its famously liberal politics, mix of old and new homes, local coffee shops, and vibrant art scene. Carol's home was filled with family photos, cozy furniture, and a kitchen that always smelled like freshly baked cookies. She loved cooking and was known for her famous chocolate chip cookies, which she often brought to work or shared with neighbors. Carol was married to Daniel McMillan, a man 16 years her junior. Despite the age difference, Carol and Daniel appeared to be a happy couple. Daniel worked for a health insurance company and was often busy with work, but the couple made time for each other. They had been married for 5 years and lived with Carol's daughter from a previous marriage, 19-year-old Sarah Levinsky McMillan. Sarah was a bright and ambitious college student studying pre-med and had dreams of becoming a doctor. Carol was proud of her daughter and supported her in every way she could. In the weeks leading up to her death, Carol was planning a family vacation to Orlando. She was excited about the trip and talked about it constantly. She had recently purchased a new suitcase and was filling it with summer clothes, sunscreen, and a new pair of sandals. Carol loved spending time with her family and couldn't wait for the getaway. But Carol's excitement would forever be cut short when, on the morning of April 17, 2019, she was found dead in her home. On the morning of April 17, 2019, Shaker Heights was just waking up. It was a cool, overcast day, typical of spring in Ohio. The neighborhood was quiet, with only a few early risers out walking their dogs or grabbing their morning coffee from Starbucks. Carol McMillan had always been an early bird, but that day something was wrong. At around 8:30 a.m., Sarah Levinsky McMillan, Carol's 19-year-old daughter, went downstairs to the kitchen. She found her mother lying on the floor, unresponsive. A can of Carol's favorite drink, and America's as well, Diet Pepsi, was spilled beside her, the sugary sweet liquid slowly seeping into the grate between the tiles. Panicked, Sarah screamed and immediately called 911, her hands shaking as she dialed. The dispatcher's voice tried to calm her down, but Sarah was too overwhelmed. She was crying and begging for someone to come quickly. When the paramedics arrived just minutes later, they found Sarah in shock, pacing back and forth in the living room. The house was eerily quiet except for the sound of the 911 call still echoing from Sarah's phone on the kitchen counter. The paramedics rushed to Carol's side, but it was too late. Carol was declared dead at the scene. Sarah couldn't believe what was happening. Just the day before, her mother had been excitedly talking about their upcoming vacation, picking out outfits and making plans. Now she was gone, and Sarah was left feeling lost and confused. As the paramedics worked, Sarah called her stepfather, Daniel McMillan, who was at work at the time. Daniel's reaction was hysterical. He immediately started wailing, almost screaming, as Sarah sobbed into the phone. He told her he would leave work right away, but he sounded almost insane with grief. The Shaker Heights Police Department was quick to respond to the scene at the McMillan residence. Detective Laura Robacek, who had been with the department for over 15 years, led the investigation. Robacek was known for her sharp eye and methodical approach. She had a reputation for solving even the most challenging cases. When she arrived at the scene on the morning of April 17, 2019, she immediately sensed something was off. The McMillan home was a typical, well-kept suburban house with a neat lawn and flower bed starting to bloom with the first signs of spring. Inside, the house was clean and organized. The only sign of anything out of the ordinary was the sight of Carol McMillan's lifeless body on the kitchen floor. Next to her was a spilled can of Diet Pepsi, America's nostalgic drink favorite, its silky brown contents pooling around her. Detective Robacek and her team began their work by securing the crime scene. Yellow tape was quickly put up around the perimeter of the house, and officers were stationed at the entrance to keep onlookers and neighbors at a distance. The investigators carefully examined the kitchen. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to be out of place. Carol's purse was on the counter, untouched, and the back door was locked from the inside. The team noticed that the can of Diet Pepsi was still relatively full, with only a small amount spilled on before. This caught Robacek's attention. She instructed the crime scene unit to collect the can as evidence, along with the remaining liquid. The team also took samples from the kitchen counter and floor to test for any unusual substances. They photographed the scene from every angle, documenting every detail. An autopsy was ordered to determine the exact cause of Carol's death. The paramedics on the scene had suspected a heart attack, but Robacek wasn't so sure. There was something about the way Carol was positioned, and the fact that she had been drinking her favorite soda, or pop as they call it in the Midwest, just moments before, that made Robacek suspicious. As the investigation continued, the detectives combed through the house for more clues. They searched Carol's personal belongings, looking for anything that might suggest foul play. Her phone was also taken as evidence, with the intention of checking her recent calls and messages. Detective Robacek knew this case would require careful examination. There was more, much more, to Carol's death than met the eye. With Carol McMillan's death under investigation, the police turned their attention to the people closest to her. The first person they questioned was her husband, Daniel McMillan. At 32 years old, Daniel was much younger than Carol. He worked for a health insurance company in Cleveland and had a reputation for being handsome, charming, and successful. He seemed to have everything: a stable job, a nice home, and a wonderful family. But as detectives began to dig deeper, they uncovered a different side of Daniel. Daniel had met Carol 6 years earlier when he was working as a junior analyst at the insurance company. Carol, a widow at the time, had been charmed by his youthful energy and confidence. They married a year later, and Daniel became a stepfather to Carol's daughter, Sarah, then 13. On the surface, their marriage seemed solid, but friends noticed that Daniel had become more distant from Carol in the past year. He spent longer hours at work, often coming home late or claiming he had to travel for business. During his first interview with the police, Daniel appeared calm, even cold. He expressed shock over Carol's death, but his emotions seemed muted. He told Detective Laura Robacek that he had been at work when it happened and had rushed home as soon as Sarah called him. When asked about his relationship with Carol, Daniel claimed that they had a good marriage, though he admitted they had grown apart over time. He insisted that he had nothing to do with her death and had no idea why anyone would want to harm her. However, as the interview continued, Detective Robacek's suspicions grew. Daniel was too composed, too controlled. When asked about Carol's plans, Daniel was vague, saying he was a feminist and didn't like to keep track of his wife's day-to-day activities. He also couldn't recall the last time they had a meaningful conversation or had sex together as a couple. Robacek found it odd that Daniel, who claimed to love his wife, seemed so disconnected from her life. The detectives also noticed inconsistencies in Daniel's statements. For instance, he mentioned that he knew about Carol's and America's favorite drink, Diet Pepsi, yet he couldn't explain why there was a half-empty can next to her body when she was found. He claimed Carol drank soda often but didn't seem to know much about her other habits or routines. As the police continued to question Daniel, they began to consider his potential motive. Could Daniel have wanted out of the marriage, or was there something else, something darker, driving him? The investigation into Daniel's life revealed that he had been keeping secrets. One of the most shocking was his sexual obsession with his stepdaughter, Sarah. This revelation gave the police a new angle to pursue. If Daniel was in love with Sarah, it could explain why he might want Carol out of the way. But proving that Daniel was involved in Carol's death would require much more evidence. Detective Robacek knew they had to be thorough, carefully piecing together the puzzle that was starting to form. The next person the police investigated was Sarah Levinsky McMillan, Carol's 19-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. Sarah was a bright and driven young woman who was well on her way to becoming a doctor. She was a pre-med student at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, where she had earned a scholarship for her academic excellence. Sarah was known for her kindness and dedication to her studies, often volunteering at local hospitals and tutoring fellow underprivileged students, a common pastime in Shaker Heights in her free time. Sarah had always looked up to her mother, seeing Carol as a role model of strength and compassion. The two were incredibly close, often spending weekends together shopping, watching movies, or just talking about life snuggled in bed together. Carol had been Sarah's biggest supporter, especially after the death of Sarah's biological father when she was just a child. The loss had forged an incredibly strong bond between mother and daughter, making Carol's sudden death all the more devastating for Sarah. When the police first approached Sarah, she was visibly distraught. The grief of losing her mother was compounded by the shock of finding her dead corpse. Sarah told the detectives that she had been studying for an upcoming biology exam when she decided to take a break and grab a snack. She went to the kitchen and found her mother on the floor, unresponsive, with a can of Diet Pepsi nearby. In a panic, Sarah called 911, hoping against hope that it wasn't too late. During the interview, Sarah was cooperative but deeply emotional. She described her mother's recent mood as happy and content, with no signs of stress or unhappiness. Sarah couldn't think of anyone who would want to harm Carol, describing her mother as someone who was loved by everyone who knew her. The police asked Sarah about her relationship with Daniel, her stepfather, and Sarah spoke highly of him, saying that he was, quote, a hottie and that she saw him as a supportive father figure. She was completely unaware of his secret sexual obsession with her, a fact that made the police even more concerned and somewhat suspicious. As detectives delved deeper into Sarah's life, they found nothing to suggest she had any involvement in her mother's death. Her alibi checked out. Sarah had been in her room, engrossed in her studies, at the time of the murder. Her social media activity showed a typical college student's life, with posts about school, friends, liberal political causes, and upcoming exams. There were no signs of any secret relationships or troubling behavior. However, the police were still suspicious of the dynamics within the McMillan household. They wondered if Sarah could have been an unknowing pawn in Daniel's plan. If Daniel's sexual obsession with Sarah was as intense as they suspected, it could mean that Sarah was in danger too. But for now, there was no evidence linking Sarah to the crime, leaving detectives to focus their attention elsewhere. The third person the police questioned was Jessica Miller, Carol's closest friend and confidant. Jessica, 45, was a real estate agent who had known Carol for over a decade. The two women had bonded over their shared experiences as working women in Shaker Heights and had become inseparable over the years. Jessica was often seen at Carol's home, helping with community events or just sharing a glass of wine in the evenings. To those who knew them, their friendship seemed unbreakable, a bond built on trust and mutual respect. However, the police soon discovered that Jessica had been keeping a significant secret. Despite her outward loyalty to Carol, Jessica had been having an affair with Daniel McMillan. This revelation came as a shock to everyone who knew the trio, especially given Jessica's deep friendship with Carol. According to Jessica, the affair began about a year before Carol's death. She claimed that it started innocently, with Daniel coming alone to one of Jessica's infamous naked hot tub parties. A few flirtatious comments, later things quickly escalated into a full-blown sexual relationship. Jessica admitted to feeling, quote, a little bleeping guilty about betraying her friend, but said she couldn't resist Daniel's, quote, smoking hot bod. When the police interviewed Jessica, she was nervous and defensive. She knew that her affair with Daniel placed her under suspicion, but she insisted that she had nothing to do with Carol's death. Jessica claimed that she was kind of saddened by Carol's passing and had even considered lowering the number of times she had sex per week with Daniel because of the guilt she felt. However, she also revealed that Daniel had recently told her he was in love with someone else and dumping, leaving her devastated. Jessica didn't know who the other woman was, but she suspected it might be someone younger, possibly Sarah. The detectives pressed Jessica for more details about her sexual relationship with Daniel and her whereabouts on the day of Carol's death. Jessica stated that she had been at a real estate showing in Cleveland Heights and had clients who could verify her alibi. The police followed up on this, confirming that Jessica was indeed with clients at the time of the murder. However, they couldn't ignore the possibility that Jessica might have been involved in some way, given her emotional turmoil and jealousy over Daniel's shifting affections. Despite her alibi, Jessica remained a person of interest in the investigation. Her affair with Daniel, coupled with her close relationship with Carol, made her a complicated figure in the case. The police had to consider whether Jessica's jealousy and heartbreak might have driven her to do something drastic. But without concrete evidence linking her to the crime, Jessica was left in a precarious position, caught between her guilt over the affair and her sorrow over losing her friend. On April 27, 2019, just after 9:00 a.m., the weather in Shaker Heights was cool and overcast, typical for an Ohio spring. As investigators continued to search for clues, they received a significant break in the case. A toxicology report came back from the lab, revealing that Carol McMillan's cause of death was cyanide poisoning. The lethal substance had been mixed into her can of Diet Pepsi, confirming that her death was not a natural occurrence but a deliberate act of murder. The revelation of cyanide as the murder weapon shocked the investigation team. Cyanide is a rare and deadly poison, often associated with high-profile cases and espionage. The detectives knew they were dealing with a premeditated crime. Someone had gone to great lengths to plan and execute Carol's murder. This new evidence shifted the focus of the investigation, giving the police a clearer direction. The detectives immediately revisited the crime scene, searching for any trace of the poison or how it might have been introduced into Carol's drink. They examined the Diet Pepsi can, the surrounding area in the kitchen, and any containers or objects that might have come into contact with the poison. Forensic experts were called in to analyze everything, from the remnants of the drink to the fingerprints on the can. While no direct trace of cyanide was found in the kitchen, the forensic team did find traces of the poison on the rim of the can, confirming that it had been deliberately laced with the deadly substance. The discovery raised more questions. Who had access to the poison, and how did they get it into Carol's drink without her noticing? The police began to dig into the backgrounds of all the suspects, searching for any history of chemical knowledge or access to dangerous substances. They also looked into recent purchases and online searches that might indicate someone had been researching or acquiring cyanide. The detectives knew that cyanide was not something easily obtained. Whoever had used it had likely done some serious planning. This new evidence also put pressure on the suspects. The police re-interviewed them, focusing on their knowledge of poisons and any suspicious behavior leading up to Carol's death. The detectives were determined to find out who had the means and motive to commit such a calculated crime. With the case now pointing definitively to murder, the investigation took on a new urgency as they closed in on the truth. On April 20, 2019, just before noon, the police made a breakthrough in the investigation that would lead them directly to the murderer. After carefully examining the evidence and re-interviewing the suspects, the detectives had begun to piece together a disturbing picture. All signs pointed to Daniel McMillan, Carol's husband, as the one responsible for her death. Daniel McMillan, 32, was a charming and successful man who worked at a health insurance company. Outwardly, he appeared to have it all: a stable job, a beautiful wife, and a picture-perfect life in the progressive utopia of Shaker Heights. However, beneath the surface, Daniel was a man driven by dark and twisted sexual desires. He had become obsessed sexually with Carol's daughter and his stepdaughter, Sarah Levinsky McMillan, from her previous marriage. Daniel had secretly harbored sexual feelings for Sarah, who was only 19 and completely unaware of his intentions. As his obsession grew, Daniel became increasingly distant from Carol, seeing her as an obstacle to his disturbing fantasy of starting a new life with Sarah as his bride. Detectives uncovered key evidence that tied Daniel to the crime. An analysis of his internet search history revealed that he had been researching cyanide for several months before Carol's death. He had searched for information on where to buy it, how to use it, and its effects on the human body. This damning evidence suggested that Daniel had carefully planned the murder, intending to use cyanide to get rid of Carol without leaving a trace. On the day of the murder, Daniel had taken advantage of Carol's daily routine. He knew that she loved Diet Pepsi and drank a can every day after work. According to the investigation, Daniel had spiked her can of Diet Pepsi with cyanide, knowing that she would drink it as soon as she got home. The poison worked quickly, causing Carol to collapse and die within minutes. Daniel's plan was to make it look like a sudden heart attack, but the toxicology report revealed the truth. The police confronted Daniel with the evidence they had gathered. At first, he tried to maintain his innocence, but as the detectives laid out the facts, his internet searches, his growing obsession with Sarah, and the traces of cyanide on the can, Daniel's facade began to crumble. Daniel's arrest shocked the Shaker Heights community. Carol's friends and neighbors were horrified to learn that the man they had once thought of as a devoted husband had committed such a heinous act. Sarah was devastated by the revelation, struggling to come to terms with the fact that the man she had considered a father figure had been secretly plotting against her mother. The trial of Daniel McMillan began on January 15, 2019, in Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court. The case drew significant media attention, with local news channels covering the proceedings extensively. Carol McMillan's murder had shocked the Shaker Heights community, and many people were eager to see justice served. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney James Leakey, 45, was known for his thorough and determined approach to criminal cases. Leakey presented a strong case against Daniel McMillan. He argued that Daniel had planned Carol's murder with premeditation, pointing to the evidence of cyanide found in Carol's Diet Pepsi and Daniel's extensive internet searches about the poison. Leakey described Daniel's actions as cold and calculated, emphasizing how Daniel's obsession with Sarah Levinsky McMillan drove him to commit the crime. On the other side, Daniel's defense attorney, Laura Phillips, 38, tried to paint a different picture. Phillips argued that Daniel was a man who had been overwhelmed by personal problems and stress, which might have affected his judgment. She claimed that Daniel's actions were not premeditated but a result of mental instability. Phillips tried to argue that there was not enough direct evidence linking Daniel to the poisoning, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. During the trial, Carol's family, including Sarah, attended each day, visibly emotional and distressed. Sarah was particularly affected by the trial, having to confront the reality of her stepfather's betrayal and her mother's death. The court saw tearful testimonies from friends and colleagues of Carol, who described her as a loving and caring person who would never have imagined such a violent end. After several days of testimony and evidence presentation, the jury deliberated and returned a verdict on January 22, 2019. Daniel McMillan was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Daniel to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was met with a mix of relief and sorrow by Carol's family and friends. They felt that while justice had been served, the pain of losing Carol and the betrayal like Daniel would linger. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the case, but it left a lasting impact on those involved. Carol's friends and family had to cope with the aftermath of the trial, trying to rebuild their lives while remembering the warmth and kindness Carol had brought into their lives. The trial was a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the most seemingly perfect facades. After Daniel McMillan's trial and sentencing, life in Shaker Heights began to return to normal. But the impact of the case was still deeply felt by those involved. The McMillan family was forever changed, and the community was left grappling with the aftermath of the crime. Daniel McMillan was transferred to the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, where he began serving his life sentence. His trial had been highly publicized, and he became a known figure in the prison system. His imprisonment was a stark contrast to the life of luxury he had once enjoyed. The media coverage of his case continued for some time, with many local news outlets reporting on his adjustment to prison life and his interactions with other inmates. Sarah Levinsky McMillan, Carol's daughter, faced a challenging road ahead. She was a pre-med student at the time of her mother's death and had been deeply affected by the murder. After the trial, Sarah took a leave from school to focus on her mental health and process the trauma of the past months. She received support from friends, family, and professional counselors. Her community rallied around her, and many people admired her resilience and strength during such a difficult time. Jessica Miller, Carol's former friend and Daniel's secret lover, also had to navigate the consequences of the case. Although she was cleared of any involvement in the murder, the affair and the role she played in Daniel's life made her a controversial figure. Jessica's real estate business suffered due to the negative publicity. She decided to move to a different city to start over, hoping to leave the past behind and rebuild her career and personal life. As time went on, Carol's friends and family worked to find a sense of normalcy. They focused on remembering her in positive ways and continuing the community work she had been passionate about. The case served as a harsh reminder of how quickly a life can be upended by betrayal and violence, leaving lasting scars on everyone involved. Willie Tanners, 49, was a well-known and respected figure in the small southern town of Tifton, Georgia. He owned Tanner's Hardware, a local store that had been serving the community for over 2 decades. Known for its friendly service and wide selection of tools and supplies, Tanner's Hardware was the kind of place where neighbors could count on finding what they needed, whether it was a simple screwdriver or advice on how to fix a leaky faucet. Willie was often seen behind the counter, greeting customers with a warm smile and chatting about everything from the weather to last night's episode of Jeopardy! Willie's life appeared ideal to those who knew him. He was married to Lynn Tanners, 48, his high school sweetheart, and the couple was often involved in local church activities and charity events. They lived in a modest but well-kept home, decorated for the holidays with twinkling lights and a wreath on the front door. However, beneath this seemingly perfect exterior, Willie was hiding a dark secret. Despite his reputation as a devoted husband and upstanding citizen, Willie had become involved in a secret affair with Madison Kelly, an 18-year-old high school senior. Madison, known for her striking looks and intelligence, was a regular customer at the hardware store. Over time, a friendship developed that quickly turned into a sexual relationship. Torn between guilt and desire, Willie struggled with his conscience as the holiday season approached. He knew the affair was wrong, but he was unable to break free from the emotional entanglement that had developed. The relationship was torrid and extremely intense, with Willie struggling between his guilt and his growing attachment to Madison. In the days leading up to his death, Willie had been distant and distracted, trying to maintain the facade of a loving husband while battling his inner turmoil. As Christmas approached in December 2019, Willie's behavior began to change. He became more distant, spending less time at home, and more time working late. Lynn noticed the change but attributed it to the stress of running the business during the busy holiday season. Friends and neighbors also noticed that Willie seemed preoccupied, no longer as cheerful as he once was. But no one could have imagined the storm brewing beneath the surface, a storm that would soon shatter the peace of their small town. It was the morning of December 22, 2019, just a few days before Christmas. Tifton, Georgia was quiet, with most of the town's residents finishing their holiday shopping or decorating their homes. Around 9:00 a.m., Lynn Tanners, Willie's wife, was returning home from her Sunday morning church service at First Baptist Church, where she had volunteered to help prepare for the upcoming Christmas Eve service. She noticed Willie's truck parked in the driveway, which struck her as odd since he had mentioned needing to pick up some last-minute supplies for the store. When Lynn entered their home on Bride Street, the first thing she noticed was the smell of fresh pine from the Christmas tree they had decorated together. The tree was still lit with colorful lights, and underneath it were neatly wrapped presents, some with her name on them. But something was off. The house was eerily silent, and Willie didn't respond when she called out his name. As Lynn walked into the living room, she was met with a sight that would haunt her forever. Willie's lifeless body lay on the floor near the Christmas tree, surrounded by shattered ornaments and tinsel. His head was soaked in blood, as if it were an enchilada, and a hammer lay nearby, covered in what she could only assume was her husband's blood. Lynn dropped to her knees, her body shaking as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Panic set in, but Lynn forced herself to stay calm enough to call 911. Her voice trembled as she explained the situation to the operator, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my lordy, my husband's not breathing. There's blood everywhere," she cried. The operator tried to keep her calm, instructing her not to touch anything and to wait outside for the police and paramedics. Within minutes, the quiet street was filled with the flashing lights of emergency vehicles. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, whispering to each other and speculating about what had happened. Lynn sat on the front porch, numb and in shock, unable to comprehend how her life had changed in an instant. The Tifton Police Department arrived on the scene within minutes of Lynn Tanner's 911 call. Leading the investigation was Detective Nora Collins, a seasoned officer with over 15 years of experience. Known for her sharp instincts and methodical approach, Detective Collins was respected by her peers and feared by criminals. As she stepped out of her unmarked cruiser, she was immediately struck by the contrast between the festive decorations on the Tanner's home and the grim scene awaiting her inside. The living room was a disturbing mix of holiday cheer and brutal violence. Christmas lights twinkled on the tree, reflecting off the shattered ornaments scattered across the floor. Willie Tanner's body lay near the base of the tree, his head caved in, like a half-eaten burrito, from what appeared to be multiple blows with a hammer. Blood had spattered across the nearby gifts, soaking the wrapping paper and ribbons. Detective Collins took in the scene, her mind racing as she began to piece together what might have happened. The hammer, still lying beside Willie's body, was immediately bagged as evidence. The crime scene was bloody, but it was also oddly confined. There were no signs of a struggle beyond the immediate area around the tree. It was as if Willie had been caught completely off guard. The forensic team arrived shortly after, led by Dr. Philip K. Wang, a meticulous and detail-oriented medical examiner who was known for his precise work. Dr. Wang began examining Willie's body, noting the severe head trauma that had likely caused instant death. He estimated the time of death to be between 10:00 p.m. and midnight the previous evening, based on the state of rigor mortis. Detective Collins directed her team to collect every possible piece of evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, took photographs, and searched for any other clues that might point to the killer. She also interviewed Lynn Tanners, who was still in shock but managed to provide a basic timeline of her morning and Willie's activities the previous day. As the investigation unfolded, Detective Collins couldn't shake the feeling that this was a crime of passion. The brutality of the attack suggested deep anger or jealousy, emotions that often fueled such violent outbursts. But who could have hated Willie Tanners enough to kill him in such a brutal way? That was the question Collins was determined to answer. The first person Detective Nora Collins decided to investigate was Madison Kelly, the 18-year-old high school senior who had also been the secret lover of Willie Tanners. Madison was known around Tifton as a bright student with a promising future. She was involved in several extracurricular activities, including the school's drama club, where she had recently wowed audiences as Tiny Tim in a local production of A Christmas Carol. But beneath her polished exterior, Madison was emotionally fragile, a trait that had become more apparent in recent months. Madison lived with her mother, Tammy Kelly, in a small but tidy house on the outskirts of town. The Kellys were known for keeping to themselves, and Tammy was known in the community for being controlling and obsessed with her daughter's appearance, especially her husband. Madison's father had left the family after coming out as gay. When Detective Collins arrived at the Kelly residence on the afternoon of December 22, she found Madison, still dressed in her jammies, in her bedroom, visibly shaken by the news of Willie's death. The room was a typical teenager's sanctuary, filled with posters of pop stars like Taylor Swift and Ariana Grande, but there were also signs of Madison's obsession with Willie. Detective Collins noticed a framed shirtless photo of Willie on Madison's nightstand, and her journals were filled with graphic entries about their sexual relationship. During the interview, Madison was initially cooperative but quickly became emotional when questioned about her relationship with Willie. She admitted to the affair, describing how they had grown close over the past year. Madison revealed that she had fallen deeply in love with Willie and had even fantasized about a future together. However, as Christmas approached, Willie had become distant, and she feared he was planning to end their relationship. When Detective Collins pressed Madison on her whereabouts the night of the murder, Madison hesitated before claiming she had been home alone, studying for her final exams. Her alibi was weak, and her emotional state raised red flags for Collins. Madison's tears and trembling hands indicated that she was under immense stress, but whether it was from guilt or grief was unclear. As the interview continued, Madison's demeanor shifted from sorrowful to defensive. She insisted she had nothing to do with Willie's death and began to speak erratically, blaming a mysterious man she called Bob for influencing her actions. Madison claimed that Bob had convinced her to pursue a sexual relationship with Willie or else he would torture her, but when pressed for more details, she became evasive and confused. Detective Collins was unconvinced by Madison's story. The combination of her emotional instability, obsession with Willie, and weak alibi made her a prime suspect. However, Collins knew she needed more concrete evidence before she could make an arrest. The investigation into Madison Kelly was far from over, and Collins was determined to uncover the truth behind Willie Tanner's tragic death. The second person on Detective Nora Collins' list was Lynn Tanners, Willie's wife of 25 years. Lynn was a well-known figure in Tifton, recognized for her deep involvement in the community and church activities. She was a warm and friendly woman, always greeting neighbors with a smile and often hosting gatherings at their home. Despite the outward appearance of a happy marriage, Detective Collins knew that Lynn had long harbored suspicions about Willie's fidelity. Lynn had spent the days leading up to the murder preparing for Christmas. She had been busy with church events, including the upcoming Christmas Eve service at First Baptist Church. To the outside world, it seemed like Lynn was focused on her faith and family, but inside, she was troubled by a growing sense of unease. She had noticed Willie's increasing absences, which he often explained away as work-related or part of his commitment to the church. However, Lynn couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When Detective Collins interviewed Lynn on December 22, Lynn was still in shock from discovering her husband's body that morning. Sitting at the kitchen table, Lynn recounted her marriage to Willie, describing him as a loving husband, but also admitting that they had grown distant and sexless in recent years, especially after their son Rifle left for college. She confessed that she had suspected Willie of having an affair after he kept turning down her requests for sex, but had no proof. Lynn's eyes welled up with tears as she spoke about the strain it had put on their relationship, particularly in the last few months. Detective Collins asked Lynn about her whereabouts on the night of the murder. Lynn stated that she had been at home, preparing for the next day's church service. She had gone to bed early, assuming Willie would join her later, but when she woke up in the middle of the night and realized he wasn't there, she assumed he had fallen asleep in the living room. It wasn't until the next morning that she discovered the gruesome truth. Lynn's account of the evening was straightforward, but Detective Collins couldn't ignore the possibility that Lynn's suspicions about Willie's affair could have driven her to commit the murder. The brutal nature of the crime suggested a deeply personal motive, and as the wife of the victim, Lynn had both the opportunity and a potential reason to kill. However, Lynn's grief appeared genuine, and her cooperation with the investigation was unwavering. She answered all of Collins' questions without hesitation and even provided access to Willie's personal belongings, including his phone and computer. Still, Collins knew that emotions could be powerful motivators, and she wasn't ready to rule Lynn out as a suspect just yet. The investigation continued, with Collins keeping a close eye on every detail of Lynn's story. The third person Detective Nora Collins needed to investigate was Tammy Kelly, the mother of Madison Kelly, and a woman with a strong-willed, controlling personality. Tammy was known around Tifton as a perfectionist, always concerned with appearances and maintaining a strict household, especially after her husband left her after coming out of the closet. She was active in the community, often organizing events at the local church, but her primary focus was on her daughter, Madison. Tammy's relationship with Madison had always been strained. Madison, who was young, beautiful, and full of sexual potential, had been the subject of Tammy's obsessive fear and attention. Tammy's control over Madison extended to every aspect of her life, from the clothes she wore to her social interactions. It was well known among their neighbors that Tammy had high expectations for her daughter and was often harsh when those expectations weren't met. Rumors had circulated that Tammy disciplined Madison severely, with one particularly disturbing story claiming that Tammy whipped Madison whenever she thought her daughter's appearance was too attractive to men in the community. Detective Collins approached Tammy on December 23, the day after Willie Tanner's body was found. Tammy was at home, seemingly unfazed by the events of the past day. She welcomed Collins into her clean living room, decorated with traditional Christmas decorations, including a perfectly trimmed tree and a nativity scene. Tammy was calm and composed as she spoke, but there was an underlying tension in her demeanor. Collins began the interview by asking Tammy about her relationship with Willie. Tammy was quick to praise Willie, describing him distantly as a good man and a pillar of the community. However, as the conversation shifted to Madison, Tammy's tone became more guarded. She admitted that she had been angered about Madison's recent behavior, noting that her daughter had begun wearing makeup and a bra in the weeks leading up to the murder. When Collins pressed Tammy about whether she knew of Madison's sexual relationship with Willie, which was exactly what she was trying to prevent, Tammy's composure faltered slightly. She denied any knowledge of the affair, but admitted that she had noticed Madison had begun to dress like a harlot, in Tammy's words. Tammy claimed that she had tried to talk to Madison about it, but her daughter had brushed her off, insisting everything was fine. Collins couldn't ignore the possibility that Tammy's jealousy and need for control could have driven her to commit the murder. Tammy's intense need for control of her daughter, combined with the potential scandal of Madison's sexual affair with a much older man, her worst nightmare, gave her a possible motive. However, Tammy remained cool and collected throughout the interview, showing no signs of guilt or remorse. She was polite and cooperative, but offered little useful information. As Collins left the Kelly home, she knew Tammy couldn't be dismissed as a suspect. The investigation was growing more complex, with each suspect revealing new layers of potential motives and secrets. But without hard evidence, Collins was still piecing together the puzzle. On December 24, 2019, just one day before Christmas, the investigation took a significant turn. It was a cold, gray morning in Tifton, Georgia, with temperatures hovering around the low 40s. Detective Nora Collins and her team were back at the Tanners' residence, meticulously combing through every inch of the crime scene, determined to find any clue they might have missed. As the team searched the house, one officer noticed something odd near the fireplace. Amidst the neatly wrapped Christmas presents, he found a small, torn piece of paper partially tucked under the rug. The paper appeared to be a handwritten note, but only a fragment was legible. It read, "Dirty boy, meet me at," followed by a time, 10:00 p.m., and the initials MK. This discovery immediately caught Detective Collins' attention. The initials MK seemed to match those of Madison Kelly, Willie's secret lover. The time mentioned in the note also coincided with the estimated time of Willie's death. Collins realized that this could be the key piece of evidence that linked Madison directly to the crime scene on the night of the murder. Collins quickly ordered a forensic analysis of the note, hoping to determine if the handwriting matched Madison's. The note was sent to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in Atlanta for further examination. Meanwhile, Collins decided to revisit Madison's home to search for anything that might tie her to the note or the crime. While at the Kelly residence, Collins and her team found a notebook in Madison's bedroom, hidden under her mattress. The notebook was filled with disturbing entries about her obsession with Willie, including plans to meet him in secret. One of the entries, dated December 22, matched the time and place mentioned in the torn note found at the Tanner's house. This new evidence was crucial. It not only placed Madison at the scene of the crime, but also provided a motive driven by jealousy and obsession. Collins felt that the case was beginning to come together, with the puzzle pieces finally falling into place. Back at the station, the forensic analysis confirmed that the handwriting on the note matched Madison's. This was the break Collins had been waiting for. With this new evidence, the focus of the investigation narrowed sharply on Madison Kelly, making her the prime suspect in Willie Tanner's murder. As the investigation progressed, all signs began pointing toward Madison Kelly, Willie's 18-year-old secret lover. The small town of Tifton, Georgia, was already reeling from the news of Willie's brutal murder, but what emerged from the investigation shocked everyone even more. Madison's obsessive love for Willie had been building for months. As the holiday season approached, her fear of being abandoned grew stronger. She was terrified that Willie, a man more than twice her age, would leave her behind to focus on his family during Christmas. The thought of losing him consumed her, driving her into a jealous rage. On the night of December 21, 2019, Madison decided to confront Willie at his home. Desperate for reassurance that he still loved her, she did something drastic. She took off all her clothes and begged him to have sex with her right then and there in the middle of the living room. Willie, already feeling the pressure of his double life and fearing that his wife would find out, panicked. He tried to end the relationship, fearing exposure and the consequences it would bring to both their lives. But this only pushed Madison over the edge. In a moment of uncontrollable fury, Madison snapped. In a moment of uncontrollable fury, she grabbed a hammer that Willie had planned to use for hanging Christmas lights and beat him to death with it. The scene was gruesome, with the festive decorations in the living room contrasting sharply with the violence of the crime. After the murder, Madison knew she was in deep trouble. In a desperate attempt to avoid punishment, she concocted a bizarre story. She feigned having early-onset schizophrenia, claiming that a secret lover named Bob had been manipulating her for years. According to her elaborate tale, Bob was a high-ranking politician involved in wild sex rituals and secret satanic and Wiccan practices. Madison insisted that Bob had forced her into a life of sin and ultimately commanded her to kill Willie. The police, however, were unimpressed by her story. Detective Nora Collins, who had been leading the investigation, saw through the lies. Despite Madison's attempts to shift the blame, the evidence was clear. The handwriting on the note found at the crime scene matched Madison's, and her obsessive entries in her notebook painted a picture of a young woman consumed by jealousy and rage. When confronted with the evidence, Madison tried to change her story. She claimed that Bob was merely a voice in her head, that she was mentally ill, and that she hadn't been in control of her actions. But the police didn't buy it. They believed she was lying to cover up her crime. On December 26, 2019, Madison Kelly was officially arrested for the murder of Willie Tanners. She was taken into custody without incident, her demeanor eerily calm as she was led away in handcuffs. The town of Tifton was left in shock, struggling to comprehend how a young woman with such a bright future could commit such a heinous act. Willie's family, devastated by the loss, found some solace in the fact that the person responsible for his death was finally behind bars. But the pain of his absence, especially during the holiday season, was something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The trial of Madison Kelly began in early February 2020. The small town of Tifton, Georgia, was gripped by the case, with many locals following every detail closely. The courtroom was packed as the prosecution and defense presented their cases. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Robert Whitman, a seasoned attorney known for his no-nonsense approach, argued that Madison's crime was premeditated. Whitman, 52, described how Madison's obsession with Willie Tanners had reached a dangerous level, leading her to commit a brutal murder when he tried to end their affair. He emphasized the cold, calculated nature of the crime, pointing to the evidence that Madison had brought the hammer with her, fully intending to use it. Whitman also dismissed Madison's claims of mental illness, calling it a desperate attempt to escape justice. On the other side, the defense attorney, Karen Blackwell, 45, who was known for her compassionate yet sharp legal mind, argued that Madison was mentally unstable at the time of the murder. Blackwell claimed that Madison had suffered from a psychotic break, driven by the fear of losing Willie and the intense pressure of their secret relationship. She asked the jury to consider Madison's troubled home life and the influence it had on her mental state. Blackwell painted a picture of a vulnerable young woman who had been manipulated by an older man and who had finally snapped under the pressure. Throughout the trial, Willie's family sat in the front row, their faces etched with grief. They listened quietly as the details of Willie's double life were laid bare for the world to see. The pain of his betrayal was clear, but so was their deep sorrow at his loss. After several days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. On February 18, 2020, Madison Kelly was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The sentence brought mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient given the brutality of the crime, while others believed it was a fair acknowledgement of Madison's youth and troubled mental state. Willie's family expressed relief that the trial was over, but knew that the scars of this tragedy would remain with them forever. After the trial concluded, life in Tifton, Georgia, slowly began to return to normal, though the memory of the crime lingered. Willie Tanners' hardware store, once a bustling hub in the community, closed its doors for good. Without Willie to run it, his family decided they couldn't keep the business going. The closure marked the end of an era for the small town, leaving a hole in the community that was difficult to fill. Madison Kelly was transferred to a state prison, where she began serving her 25-year sentence. Despite her attempts to feign mental illness during the trial, the prison's psychiatric evaluations found no evidence of schizophrenia or any other condition that would have explained her actions. Madison spent her days in relative isolation, with few visitors. Her once promising future was now a distant memory, replaced by the reality of a life behind bars. Lynn Tanners, Willie's widow, struggled to cope with the revelations about her husband's double life. The knowledge that Willie had been unfaithful with an 18-year-old girl was a heavy burden to bear. Despite the support of her church community, Lynn withdrew from public life, choosing to grieve in private. She eventually sold the family home and moved to a nearby town, hoping for a fresh start away from the memories that haunted her. Tammy Kelly, Madison's mother, faced her own challenges after the trial. The scandal had brought shame upon her family, and Tammy's once ironclad grip on her daughter's life had shattered. Tammy became a pariah in the community, with many blaming her controlling nature for Madison's downfall. She too retreated from public view, avoiding the judgmental stares of her neighbors. For the residents of Tifton, the events of December 2019 served as a stark reminder that even in a close-knit community, secrets can fester and lead to tragedy. The town's Christmas celebrations that year were muted as the memory of Willie Tanner's murder cast a long shadow over the holiday season. It would take years for the community to heal, and even then, the story of Madison Kelly and Willie Tanner's would be remembered as one of the darkest chapters in Tifton's history. Harold Hal Griffin was a man many people in Kokomo, Indiana, knew well. At 63 years old, he had spent over 3 decades managing a grocery store chain that was popular in the community. Hal had a way of making people feel welcome, whether they were customers or employees. His friendly smile and sharp business skills made him respected in his hometown. After retiring, Hal moved to Prescott, Arizona, in search of a quieter life. Prescott, known for its mild weather and beautiful landscapes, was a popular destination for retirees. Hal settled into this peaceful town, spending his days gardening, attending local events, and relaxing. But Hal's life wasn't as simple as it appeared. His marriage to Mary had been troubled for years, mostly because of her declining health. Mary had been diagnosed with brain cancer, which had taken a toll on both of them. Hal, feeling lonely and emotionally drained, started looking for comfort elsewhere. He began seeing other men for sex, but only a few close friends knew about this very secret part of his life. Hal found particular comfort in sexual relationships with 2 other men, Leonard Lenny Bartholf and Pete Peterson. Lenny, a 60-year-old retired banker from Minnesota, had been Hal's first male lover. Lenny was deeply attached to Hal, believing they would eventually be together once Mary's health declined further. The third person in this love triangle was Pete Peterson, a 56-year-old insurance adjuster who also lived in Prescott. Pete's relationship with Hal was more casual, with the 2 meeting every now and then for quick sex, but he secretly hoped that Hal would leave both Mary and Lenny to start a new life with him. In the days leading up to his death, Hal seemed preoccupied. He had confided in a close friend that he was considering making big changes in his life. Hal was torn between his responsibilities at home and his desires for freedom and happiness. Unfortunately, his hopes for a fresh start would be cut short by the tragic events that soon unfolded. On the afternoon of July 15, 2011, Prescott, Arizona, was experiencing its typical summer weather, hot and dry, with temperatures reaching the mid-90s. It was around 2:30 p.m. when Mary Griffin, Hal's wife, realized she hadn't seen him all day. This was unusual, as Hal usually spent his mornings tending to his garden or reading the newspaper on the porch. Concerned, Mary decided to check the house, starting with the kitchen, where Hal often prepared their lunch. As she entered the kitchen, Mary was met with a scene of horror. Hal was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, his body still and lifeless. He had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and abdomen. The kitchen was in disarray, with broken dishes and overturned chairs scattered around the room, evidence of a violent struggle. The sight overwhelmed Mary, who was already frail due to her illness. Her initial reaction was shock, followed by a wave of panic. Struggling to maintain her composure, Mary managed to dial 911, her voice trembling as she reported what she had found. The 911 operator, sensing the urgency in Mary's voice, immediately dispatched police and emergency medical services to the Griffin residence. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Hal had been dead for several hours by the time they arrived. Mary, distraught and in shock, was taken to the hospital as a precaution. She was unable to provide much information to the authorities, her mind struggling to process the horrific scene she had just witnessed. The discovery of Hal's body sent shockwaves through the quiet Prescott community. Neighbors, who were used to the tranquility of their retirement paradise, were suddenly thrust into the middle of a murder investigation. As news spread, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Something terrible had happened in the Griffin household, and the search for answers was just beginning. Detective Robert Bob Jensen arrived at the Griffin residence on the afternoon of July 15, 2011. The summer heat was intense, with temperatures soaring into the mid-90s, typical for Prescott, Arizona in July. Jensen was a seasoned investigator with the Prescott Police Department, known for his methodical approach and keen attention to detail. He had seen his fair share of crime scenes, but the brutal nature of this one immediately struck him as a crime of passion. The kitchen was in chaos. Blood splattered the walls and floor, and a pool of blood surrounded Hal Griffin's lifeless body. A kitchen knife, the apparent murder weapon, lay nearby, covered in blood. The scene suggested a violent struggle. Broken dishes, an overturned chair, and scattered items indicated that Hal had fought desperately for his life. Jensen carefully stepped around the evidence, noting every detail. He knew that every piece of the puzzle could be crucial in solving this case. Jensen was joined by Officer Ophelia Lopez, a young but sharp member of the team, who had a reputation for her quick thinking. Together, they began their initial assessment of the scene. Jensen noticed that the house showed no signs of forced entry, which led him to believe that Howell had known his attacker. The struggle appeared to have been contained to the kitchen, with no evidence of the fight spilling into other parts of the house. As the detectives worked, forensic technicians arrived to document the scene. They took photographs, collected samples of the blood, and dusted for fingerprints. The technicians also swabbed the knife for DNA evidence, hoping to find something that would lead them to the killer. Jensen observed as they bagged the knife and other key pieces of evidence, knowing these would be crucial in the investigation. Outside, the neighbors were beginning to gather, whispering among themselves. Prescott was a quiet town, and a murder like this was a rare and shocking event. As Jensen stepped out to speak with some of the onlookers, he was met with a mix of fear and curiosity. Many knew Hal as a friendly, easygoing man, making the violent nature of his death even more unsettling. Back inside, Jensen and Lopez continued their examination. They were particularly interested in the timeline of events. When had Hal last been seen alive, and who could have had access to the house during that time? Jensen made a mental note to interview Hal's wife, Mary, as soon as she was able to speak, knowing that her testimony could provide crucial insights. The investigation was just beginning, but one thing was clear to Jensen: this was no random act of violence. The ferocity of the attack and the lack of forced entry pointed to a killer with a personal connection to Hal, someone who had been driven by strong emotions. The task now was to uncover who that person was and why they had turned to murder. Leonard Lenny Bartholf, 60, was the first person of interest in the investigation. Lenny had been living with Hal and Mary Griffin for nearly a year under the pretense of being a down-on-his-luck friend whom Hal had taken in. In reality, Lenny was much more than a house guest. He was Hal's secret gay lover. Their relationship had been ongoing for several years, beginning back in Indiana before Hal's retirement. Lenny, a retired banker, was known for his meticulous and conservative nature. He had worked at the same bank for 40 years before retiring to Arizona. Lenny had always been a reserved and disciplined man, qualities that had served him well in his banking career. However, beneath this calm exterior, Lenny was deeply in love with Hal and harbored intense feelings of jealousy and insecurity. He had hoped that once Mary's health declined further and she succumbed to her cancer, he and Hal could be together openly. Lenny was protective of Hal, often to the point of possessiveness, and he had struggled with the knowledge that Hal had sexual relationships with other men, particularly Pete Peterson. Detective Robert Jensen and Officer Ophelia Lopez brought Lenny in for questioning on July 16, the day after Hal's body was found. The interrogation took place in a small, windowless room at the Prescott Police Department. Lenny appeared nervous but composed, his hands shaking slightly as he answered their questions. Jensen, who was known for his calm yet probing interrogation style, began by asking Lenny about his relationship with Hal. Lenny hesitated but eventually admitted to their romantic involvement, his voice cracking as he spoke. He insisted that he loved Hal deeply and would never hurt him. Jensen then asked Lenny about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. Lenny claimed that he had been asleep in his room and had not heard anything unusual. However, Jensen noticed that Lenny's story had some inconsistencies. For example, Lenny couldn't explain why he hadn't heard the struggle that had clearly taken place in the kitchen, just a few rooms away. When pressed further, Lenny became agitated, raising his voice and demanding to know why he was being accused of something so horrible. The detectives also asked Lenny about his relationship with Pete Peterson, Hal's other lover. Lenny's demeanor shifted noticeably at the mention of Pete. His jealousy was evident as he spoke bitterly about Pete, accusing him of trying to come between him and Hal. Lenny's resentment towards Pete was clear, and it gave the detectives a possible motive: jealousy and fear of losing Hal. Despite Lenny's emotional responses and the inconsistencies in his story, he denied any involvement in Hal's murder. The detectives released him after several hours of questioning, but he remained a key suspect. Jensen couldn't shake the feeling that Lenny was hiding something, and he knew they needed more evidence to either prove or disprove Lenny's involvement in the crime. The second suspect in Hal Griffin's murder was his wife, Mary Griffin. At 61, Mary had once been a vibrant and active woman, known around Prescott for her involvement in local church activities and charity work. However, her life had taken a drastic turn in recently after being diagnosed with brain cancer. The illness had left her weak and dependent on Hall for nearly all her daily needs. Though Mary had always been sweet-natured, the cancer had taken a toll on her memory and cognitive abilities, often leaving her confused and forgetful. Despite her illness, Mary's love for Hall was undeniable. Their marriage had transitioned to become more of a caretaker relationship, with Hall dedicating much of his time to looking after her. However, those close to the couple had noticed that Mary seemed troubled in the months leading up to Hall's death. She had moments of clarity where she appeared aware that something was amiss in her marriage, but she couldn't fully grasp the reality of Hall's secret life. Detective Robert Jensen and Officer Ophelia Lopez decided to question Mary on July 17, 2011, 2 days after Hall's body was found. They visited her at the hospital where she was being treated for the moment. A hospital was a quiet, sterile environment, far removed from the violence seen at the Griffin home. Mary was resting in bed, looking frail and tired, but she managed a weak smile when the detectives entered the room. Jensen approached the interview with care, knowing that Mary's mental state could affect her responses. He began by asking her about her relationship with Hall. Mary spoke lovingly of her husband, recalling their early years together and how he had always been there for her during her illness. She mentioned how Hall had become more distant recently, often leaving the house for long periods without explaining where he had been. However, she dismissed these thoughts, attributing them to her illness rather than anything Hall had done. The detectives then asked Mary about the night of the murder. Mary struggled to remember specific details, a common symptom of her condition. She couldn't recall hearing anything unusual that night and was genuinely shocked when she learned of Hall's death. Tears welled up in her eyes as she expressed disbelief that someone could harm the man who had cared for her so lovingly. When asked if she knew about Hall's relationships with other men, Mary seemed confused. She hesitated, then shook her head, saying that Hall had always been devoted to her. However, Jensen noted that Mary's confusion could be masking deeper emotions, perhaps a buried awareness of Hall's affairs or a fear that she wasn't the only one in his life. Despite her frail condition, Mary remained a suspect, if only because she was Hall's wife and had the closest relationship with him. However, the detectives knew that without clear evidence or a more coherent testimony, it would be difficult to build a case against her. For now, they would have to keep looking for more concrete leads. The third suspect in Hall Griffin's murder was Pete Peterson, a 56-year-old insurance adjuster who had been living in Prescott for several years. Pete was known in the community for his calm, steady demeanor and his predictable routine. He was the kind of man who enjoyed a simple, quiet life, and he was often seen at local diners like Denny's or grabbing coffee at Dutch Brothers. Pete's involvement in a sexual relationship with Hall was not well known, but those who were aware of their relationship described it as mainly being casual sex, unlike Hall's more intense connection with Lenny Bartholf. Pete had been seeing Hall for about a year, meeting discreetly for sex whenever and wherever they could. To Pete, their relationship was more about companionship and physical comfort than deep emotional ties. He knew about Lenny and even saw him as competition, but he wasn't overly concerned. Pete had pushed Hal to leave Mary and Lenny behind and start fresh with him, but Hal had always been hesitant to make such a drastic move. On July 18, 2011, 3 days after Hall's body was discovered, detectives Robert Jensen and Ophelia Lopez brought Pete in for questioning. Pete arrived at the Prescott Police Department dressed neatly, his expression calm but wary. The detectives, aware of Pete's steady personality, expected him to be cooperative, but were prepared to dig deeper if needed. Jensen began the interview by asking Pete about his relationship with Hall. Pete was upfront about their sexual involvement, describing it as casual and admitting that they had seen each other off and on for sex for about a year. He spoke in a measured tone, careful with his words, and avoided giving too much detail about their relationship. When Jensen asked if Pete had known about Lenny, Pete's face hardened slightly. He acknowledged that he knew about Lenny, but claimed he didn't see him as a serious rival. Hal was his own man, Pete said. He loved who he loved. The conversation then turned to the night of the murder. Pete explained that he had been home alone, watching television, specifically reruns of Law and Order, Special Victims Unit on USA Network, and had gone to bed early. He insisted that he hadn't seen Hal that day and that they hadn't spoken for a few days before the murder. His alibi was simple, but the detectives couldn't find anything to directly contradict it. When pressed about his feelings towards Hal and the possibility of Hal leaving him for Lenny, Pete's calm exterior began to crack. He admitted that the idea of losing Hal had upset him, but he quickly composed himself, stating that he wasn't the kind of person to act out of anger. However, Jensen noticed a flicker of emotion in Pete's eyes, something that hinted at a deeper, more complex relationship with Hall than Pete was willing to admit. After several hours of questioning, the detectives released Pete. Although he had remained mostly calm and cooperative, they were left with a sense that there was more to his story. Pete's steady demeanor, while reassuring, also made it difficult to gauge his true feelings. The detectives knew they needed to keep an eye on Pete as they continued to unravel the tangled relationships surrounding Hal Griffin's death. On July 20, 2011, 5 days after Hal Griffin's body was discovered, the Prescott Police Department received a crucial lead in the case. The day was hot and dry, typical for an Arizona summer, with temperatures hovering around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Detective Robert Jensen had just finished reviewing the initial reports when a call came in from a local hardware store, True Value, located off Gurley Street. The store manager reported that someone had found something unusual in the dumpster behind the store. Jensen and his partner, Officer Ofelio Lopez, quickly drove to the scene. The hardware store was a familiar spot in Prescott, known for its friendly service and wide selection of tools and supplies. When they arrived, the manager led them to the back of the store where the dumpsters were located. A smell of garbage and the buzz of flies filled the air as Tom pointed to a large black trash bag sitting on top of the pile. Inside the bag, Jensen and Lopez found a blood-stained shirt and a pair of gloves. The shirt was torn and soaked with blood, clearly connected to the violent crime that had taken place in Hal Griffin's home. The gloves were made of latex, the kind commonly used for cleaning or handling chemicals, but they were also smeared with dried blood. Jensen carefully bagged the items as evidence and immediately had them sent to the crime lab for analysis. While waiting for the results, the detectives reviewed the security footage from the hardware store. Unfortunately, the camera angle didn't capture the exact spot where the bag had been dumped, but it did show a shadowy figure moving near the dumpsters late at night. The footage was grainy, and the person's identity was unclear, but it gave the detectives a timeline for when the evidence was likely discarded. A few days later, the lab results came back, confirming that the blood on the shirt and gloves matched Hal Griffin's DNA. This was a significant breakthrough in the case, suggesting that the person who dumped the bag had been directly involved in the murder. The discovery also indicated that the killer had attempted to dispose of evidence in a hurry, possibly panicking after the crime. The police now had a strong piece of evidence that could link the suspects to the crime. Jensen and Lopez knew they were closing in on the truth, but they still needed to determine who had thrown the bag into the dumpster and why. The investigation intensified as they worked to connect this new evidence to one of the suspects they had already questioned. On July 24, 2011, just over a week after Hal Griffin's body was discovered, the Prescott Police Department made a breakthrough in the case. The analysis of the blood-stained shirt and gloves found in the True Value hardware store dumpster had revealed something crucial, a partial fingerprint on one of the latex gloves. After running the print through the national database, it matched Leonard Lenny Bartholf, Hal's longtime lover. Lenny Bartholf, a 60-year-old retired banker, had been living with Hal and his wife, Mary, under the guise of being a down-and-out man Hal had taken in. In reality, Lenny and Hal had been involved in a secret sexual relationship for several years, a fact that was unknown to most people in Prescott. Lenny was deeply in love with Hal and believed that once Mary's health deteriorated, they would be together openly, but Lenny had grown increasingly paranoid about Hal's other relationships, particularly with Pete Peterson, the calm, placid insurance adjuster who had been a casual sex partner of Hal's. On the night of July 15, Lenny had confronted Hal in the kitchen of their Prescott home. Lenny had heard rumors that Hal was planning to leave him and start a new life with Pete. Fueled by jealousy and fear of losing the only person he truly loved, Lenny demanded answers. Hal, feeling cornered, admitted that he had considered leaving Prescott with Pete. This confession pushed Lenny over the edge. In a fit of rage and heartbreak, he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Hal multiple times in the chest and abdomen. After the murder, Lenny panicked. Realizing the gravity of what he had done, he attempted to clean up the scene, but the mess was too overwhelming. In his haste, he grabbed the blood-stained shirt and gloves, stuffed them into a trash bag, and drove to the True Value hardware store, where he dumped the bag in the dumpster. He hoped this would cover his tracks, but the discovery of the items led the police straight to him. On the afternoon of July 24, the police arrived at the Griffin home with an arrest warrant for Lenny. He was in the backyard, tending to Mary's garden when detectives Robert Jensen and Ophelia Lopez approached him. Lenny didn't resist arrest. He was visibly shaken but showed no surprise when they informed him of the charges. He quietly admitted to the crime, saying he hadn't meant to kill Hal but couldn't control his anger. Hal's family, particularly Mary, was devastated by the arrest. Mary, still battling brain cancer, was in shock, unable to comprehend that her husband had been living a double life and that Lenny, whom she had trusted, was his killer. The news spread quickly through Prescott, shocking the small community that had known Hal as a friendly, outgoing retiree. The arrest of Lenny Bartholf marked the beginning of the end for this tragic case. The police had pieced together the puzzle, revealing a story of love, jealousy, and betrayal that had led to a deadly outcome. But the full story would only come to light in a courtroom, where Lenny would face justice for his actions. The trial of Leonard Lenny Bartholf began on October 3, 2011, in the Yavapai County Courthouse in Prescott, Arizona. The case had garnered attention, not only because of the brutal nature of the crime, but also due to the scandalous details of Hal Griffin's secret life that had come to light. The courtroom was packed with locals eager to delve into the story of love, betrayal, and murder in this quiet retirement community. The prosecution was led by District Attorney James McLean, a seasoned lawyer known for his no-nonsense approach in the courtroom. McLean, a 58-year-old with a reputation for being tough but fair, laid out a compelling case against Lenny. He argued that Lenny's actions were premeditated, driven by jealousy and a deep fear of abandonment. McLean detailed how Lenny had lived a double life, pretending to be a homeless man taken in out of charity, while secretly maintaining a romantic relationship with Hal. He painted a picture of a man who couldn't bear the thought of losing Hal to Pete Peterson, and in a fit of rage, had murdered the very person he claimed to love. The defense, led by public defender Frankie Clark, took a different approach. Clark, a 42-year-old lawyer with a calm demeanor, argued that Lenny's actions were not premeditated, but were instead the result of a momentary lapse in control. She portrayed Lenny as a man who had been deeply in love, confused, and heartbroken by Hal's admission that he was planning to leave him. Clark emphasized Lenny's clean record, his service at the bank for 40 years, and his role as a quiet, disciplined member of society who had never shown signs of violence before this incident. She appealed to the jury's sympathy, asking them to consider the emotional turmoil that had led Lenny to commit the crime. Throughout the trial, Hal Griffin's family watched the proceedings with a mix of sadness and anger. Mary Griffin, frail and devastated, sat quietly as the details of her husband's double life were exposed to the world. The betrayal was almost as painful as the murder itself, and her emotions were evident as she listened to the arguments. After 2 weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury reached a verdict. On October 17, 2011, Leonard Bartholf was found guilty of second-degree murder. The jury believed that while Lenny's actions were driven by emotion, they were still deliberate and intentional. Judge Martin Harris sentenced Lenny to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that reflected the seriousness of the crime but also took into account Lenny's previously clean record and the emotional circumstances surrounding the case. The sentence brought a sense of closure to Hal Griffin's family, though it didn't erase the pain of losing him. For Mary Griffin, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but the cost had been the shattering of the life she thought she knew. As for the Prescott community, the trial and its outcome left a lasting impact, a reminder that even in the most peaceful places, dark secrets can lead to tragic consequences. After the trial, life for those involved in the tragic events of July 2011 changed dramatically. Joel Donovan, 29, was a Boston native who worked as a successful software engineer at a small tech company in the city. He grew up in a lower middle-class family and had always been known for his intelligence and problem-solving skills. After attending Northeastern University, where he earned a degree in computer science and a reputation as a prodigy, Joel quickly found success in his career. His laid-back personality, dry sense of humor, and sharp mind made him well-liked by his friends and colleagues. In his personal life, Joel was deeply in love with his fiancée, Rebecca Abernathy, 27. The two had met through mutual friends in Boston, and their relationship had grown quickly. Friends described Joel as being smitten with Rebecca, who was outgoing and full of energy, a stark contrast to his more reserved nature. Despite their differences, they seemed to complement each other well. Rebecca had also developed a close friendship with Joel's mother, Patricia Donovan. The two went and bonded over their shared interest and spent a lot of time together. Joel's love for Rebecca was evident to everyone around him, and he believed they were a perfect match. They had planned a beautiful wedding to take place at a ranch near Marana, Arizona, in late February 2020, choosing the venue for its scenic views and rustic charm. However, in the weeks leading up to the wedding, Joel began to notice Rebecca's odd behavior. She seemed distant and distracted, often disappearing for hours at a time without explanation. This led to growing suspicion in Joel's mind. Still, he tried to push these thoughts aside, hoping that it was just pre-wedding stress. The day before the wedding, Joel spent time with his best man and close friend, Patrick Walsh, and they talked about their futures. Joel shared how excited he was to marry Rebecca and to start the next chapter of his life. He had plans to move to a bigger house and maybe even start a family soon. But those dreams were cut tragically short just one day later. On the afternoon of February 22, 2020, what was supposed to be a joyful wedding day took a horrific turn. It was around 4:30 p.m. when Joel Donovan's body was discovered at a picturesque ranch near Marana, Arizona. The ranch, a popular wedding venue known for its sprawling desert views and rustic barns, had been transformed for Joel and Rebecca's wedding. But instead of celebrating, guests were left shocked and horrified by what unfolded. Joel was found by his best man and close friend, Patrick Walsh. After hearing a commotion following Joel's shocking accusation that his new wife was a cheater during his wedding speech, Patrick rushed to check on his friend. He found Joel lying on the floor near the reception area, covered in blood. Joel had been stabbed multiple times in the chest. The knife, which had been used to cut the wedding cake earlier in the evening, lay nearby, stained with blood. Patrick was in disbelief. He had known Joel for most of his life and never imagined something like this could happen on what should have been one of the happiest days of his lives. His initial reaction was panic. Shaking, he called 911 and tried to explain what he had found. His voice was shaky as he told the dispatcher that Joel had been stabbed and was unresponsive. Several wedding guests had also seen the aftermath and were screaming in terror, adding to the chaos. Within minutes, the venue turned into a scene of confusion. Guests were ushered away from the crime scene, many of them still in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Some guests, who had been enjoying the open bar and taking pictures with their smartphones, found themselves documenting a murder scene instead. Photos and videos taken earlier in the day quickly spread on social media, with many people sharing their disbelief at how quickly the celebration turned into tragedy. Patrick tried to administer first aid, but quickly realized there was nothing more he could do. Joel was already gone by the time paramedics arrived. It was a gruesome sight. Blood pooled on the floor, Joel's tuxedo soaked red, and his eyes wide open in shock. The paramedics officially pronounced Joel dead on the scene, and the entire venue was put on lockdown while local authorities arrived to begin their investigation. Police arrived at the ranch near Marana, Arizona, at approximately 5:00 p.m. on February 22, 2020, just minutes after receiving Patrick Walsh's 911 call. Leading the investigation was Detective Martina Morales, a seasoned investigator with the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Known for her calm demeanor and sharp instincts, Morales immediately took charge of the chaotic situation. As the sun began to set over the desert, the ranch's picturesque setting clashed with the grim scene inside the reception area. Blood was splattered across the wooden floor where Joel Donovan's body lay, his tuxedo soaked in red. The wedding cake, which had been beautifully decorated with desert flowers, stood nearby, its knife now a murder weapon. Guests had been ushered outside by staff, some still wearing their formal attire, visibly shaken by the horrific events. Detective Morales and her team immediately began surveying the area, carefully marking off sections of the reception hall with yellow crime scene tape. They started by photographing the scene and collecting potential evidence. The murder weapon, the cake knife, was the first piece of evidence collected. Morales noted that it appeared to have been wiped hastily, likely in a panic by the attacker, but blood traces were still clearly visible on the blade. Joel had been stabbed multiple times in the chest, each wound deep and precise. Based on the angle of the stab wounds, the detectives believed the attacker had been standing close to him, possibly face to face. Blood spatter analysis was done to determine the sequence of events, with experts using luminol spray to check for any hidden bloodstains that might have been missed by the naked eye. Morales quickly interviewed the guests, many of whom were still in shock, their wedding clothes rumpled and their faces pale. Everyone described hearing Joel's shocking accusation during his wedding speech. "My wife is a cheater," followed by a loud commotion. Some guests reported seeing a masked intruder rushing through the crowd moments after Joel collapsed. However, no one could give a clear description of the attacker. Security footage from the venue was immediately retrieved, and officers began reviewing it on site. Morales hoped that it would reveal more about the mysterious masked intruder, but the video quality was poor, making it difficult to identify anyone clearly. With the scene secured and evidence collected, Morales knew this would be a long and complex case. The investigation was just beginning. The first suspect the police turned their attention to was Rebecca Abernethy Donovan, the 27-year-old bride and Joel Donovan's new wife. In the hours following the murder, Rebecca was taken to the Pima County Sheriff's Office for questioning. Still wearing her white wedding dress, now stained with blood, Rebecca appeared dazed and in shock. She was a marketing executive from Boston, known for her outgoing personality and her tendency to enjoy the spotlight, a sharp contrast to her husband's more reserved nature. Detective Morales led the interrogation. Her goal was to determine whether Rebecca had any involvement in Joel's murder. From the start, Rebecca was emotional, her voice trembling as she recounted the events of the day. She described her marriage to Joel as mostly happy, though she admitted they had experienced difficulties leading up to the wedding, she said tearfully. Rebecca's emotions fluctuated wildly during the interview, swinging between sobbing and stunned silence. When Morales brought up Joel's shocking accusation, his claim that Rebecca had been unfaithful, Rebecca's face went pale. She initially denied everything, claiming she had no idea what Joel was talking about. However, the police were already aware of Joel's suspicions about Rebecca's affair. They had learned from friends and family that Joel had grown distant and paranoid in the weeks before the wedding, convinced that Rebecca was hiding something. Under further questioning, Rebecca's calm began to crack. Her responses became evasive, and she grew defensive when pressed about the affair. Morales noted that Rebecca's emotions seemed exaggerated at times, raising suspicions about whether she was hiding something. However, despite her suspicious behavior, Rebecca denied any involvement in Joel's murder. She insisted that she had been frozen in shock when Joel was attacked, and had no idea who the masked intruder was. Rebecca's secret affair, it turned out, wasn't just with anyone. It was with another woman. The revelation of this affair added a complicated twist to the case. Joel had apparently caught Rebecca sending sexually explicit texts just hours before the ceremony, and his accusation during the wedding speech had been his way of exposing her. Although Rebecca's affair was a clear motive for tension between her and Joel, there was no direct evidence linking her to the murder. She was released after several hours of questioning, but remained under close surveillance as the investigation continued. The investigation took a dramatic turn on the morning of February 23, 2020, the day after Joel Donovan's murder. The weather was clear and crisp, with temperatures hovering in the mid-60s, typical for the Arizona desert in late winter. While the police had been initially stumped by the masked intruder's identity, new evidence emerged that added a shocking layer to the case. Around 10:00 a.m., Detective Morales received a call from one of the wedding venue's cleaning staff. The worker had been tidying up the honeymoon suite when she discovered something unusual, a pair of torn women's undergarments beneath the bed, along with a half-empty bottle of champagne. The discovery prompted Morales to order a full sweep of the suite. What they found next would change the course of the investigation. In the bed, they found traces of bodily fluids, confirming that a sexual act had taken place just hours before the wedding. DNA testing later revealed that both Rebecca Abernethy Donovan and Joel's own mother, Patricia Donovan, had been having sex in the bed together. This was the breakthrough the police needed. It turned out that moments before the wedding ceremony, Joel had walked in on Rebecca and Patricia having sex in the honeymoon suite. Overcome with shock and rage, Joel left the suite without confronting them, deciding instead to make a public spectacle at the wedding. It was this moment of heartbreak and fury that led to Joel's explosive declaration during his wedding speech. "My wife is a cheater." He had been planning to expose both his mother and his bride in front of all the guests. According to interviews with friends and family, Joel had been suspicious of Rebecca's behavior for weeks, but had never expected to catch her in such a betrayal with his own mother. Detective Morales now had a clearer understanding of the motive behind Joel's outburst, as well as a better picture of the emotional state of both Rebecca and Patricia at the time of the murder. The affair was a secret that neither woman wanted to come to light, and Joel's exposure of their relationship had shattered the facade they built. With this new evidence, Morales shifted her focus back to Rebecca and Patricia. The wedding day betrayal had set the stage for the murder, and it was becoming clear that the motive was deeply personal. Now, Morales needed to determine whether it was Rebecca, Patricia, or someone else who had taken the ultimate step to silence Joel forever. After uncovering the shocking affair between Rebecca Abernethy Donovan and Patricia Donovan, the police turned their attention to Joel's mother, Patricia, as the second key suspect. At 61 years old, Patricia was a well-known figure in her small town outside Boston, where she owned a popular diner, Donovan's Diner, which had been featured in a 2018 Boston Globe article for its classic comfort food. Despite her public reputation as a hardworking businesswoman and a devoted single mother, Patricia had a secret life that few knew about. For nearly 4 months, Patricia had been involved in a sexual affair with Rebecca, her son's fiancée. The affair had started innocently enough, with Rebecca confiding in Patricia about her cold feet as the wedding approached. But what began as emotional support quickly turned into something more. Patricia had developed intense sexual feelings for Rebecca and had grown possessive of her, desperate to keep their relationship hidden from Joel and the rest of their family. When Joel discovered them having sex in the honeymoon suite hours before the ceremony, Patricia knew everything was about to unravel. After Joel's public accusation at the wedding, Patricia had remained silent, trying to keep her composure as her son exposed her darkest secret. Her facade cracked when Joel was murdered in front of all the guests, stabbed by a masked intruder. Patricia became a prime suspect, as her emotional connection to Rebecca and the humiliation she faced gave her a strong motive to silence Joel. Detective Morales interrogated Patricia for several hours at the Pima County Sheriff's Office. During the questioning, Patricia appeared calm but deeply emotional, often pausing to wipe away tears. She admitted to the affair with Rebecca, but vehemently denied any involvement in her son's murder. However, the detectives noted inconsistencies in her story. Patricia claimed to have been in shock during the attack, yet several wedding guests reported seeing her leaving the area before Joel was stabbed. Despite her denials, Patricia's behavior during the interrogation raised red flags. Her emotional state shifted rapidly, from sorrow to anger, as Morales pressed her on the details of the affair and its aftermath. Although Patricia continued to deny any involvement in the murder, her possessiveness over Rebecca and the shame of being publicly exposed made her a compelling suspect. However, without direct evidence linking her to the attack, the police couldn't yet make an arrest. For now, Patricia remained the suspect, her secrets threatening to destroy everything she had worked so hard to protect. The third suspect the police focused on was Patrick Daniel Walsh, Joel Donovan's best man and lifelong friend. Patrick, 29, was a middle school teacher back in Boston. Known for his outgoing personality and laid-back attitude, he was a fixture in Joel's life since they were kids. They'd grown up together, attended college at the same time, and shared a close bond. Patrick had always been seen as a bit of a womanizer, often dating multiple women at once, but no one ever expected him to be tied to such a brutal crime. At the wedding, Patrick had stood just a few feet away from Joel during the shocking outburst where Joel accused Rebecca of cheating. Patrick had been one of the first people to rush to Joel's side after the stabbing, shouting for someone to call 911. Despite his apparent distress, the police couldn't overlook the fact that Patrick had been very close to both Joel and Rebecca in the months leading up to the wedding, and there were rumors he knew about an affair long before the ceremony. It was later revealed that Patrick had actually discovered Rebecca's affair with Patricia Donovan weeks before the wedding, but had kept it quiet. According to testimony from other family friends, Patrick had seen Rebecca sneaking around with Patricia during wedding planning trips but chose not to tell Joel. The reason? Patrick had been secretly sexually involved with Rebecca too. Their brief fling had started after a late-night conversation over drinks during one of those wedding planning weekends. Patrick had hoped it would continue, but Rebecca had ended it quickly, telling him she was committed to marrying Joel. Detectives questioned Patrick in the days following the murder. He appeared visibly shaken but cooperative. When asked why he hadn't come forward with the affair sooner, Patrick admitted he didn't want to hurt his friend. But the police couldn't ignore the possibility that Patrick's silence and close relationship with both Joel and Rebecca might have given him a motive. While Patrick's involvement in the affair added another layer of complexity to the case, there was no physical evidence linking him to the murder scene. Still, his proximity to the crime and his relationship with both the bride and the victim kept him firmly on the list of suspects. It wasn't until the police took a closer look at the chaos unfolding at the Donovan wedding that they began to piece together the truth. The murder investigation had already examined Rebecca, Joel's bride, and Patrick, the best man, as suspects. But as more guests were interviewed, attention shifted to someone who, at first, seemed like an unlikely culprit, Joel's own mother, Patricia Donovan. Patricia Donovan, 61, had built a reputation in Boston as a successful diner owner. She was well known for her strong work ethic and no-nonsense attitude, but underneath that polished exterior, Patricia had been hiding a secret affair with her son's fiancée, Rebecca. The affair had been going on for months, and Joel discovered the shocking truth just hours before the wedding. According to a close friend of the couple, Joel had walked in on Rebecca and Patricia having sex in the bed of their honeymoon suite moments before the ceremony. Overwhelmed with heartbreak and anger, Joel decided to expose their affair during his wedding speech. In front of the entire crowd, he screamed, "My wife's a cheater," bringing their secret out into the open. This public humiliation was too much for Patricia. As she stood there, reeling from the shock of being exposed by her own son, Patricia snapped. Overcome with a mixture of rage and desperation, she changed into a hoodie and jeans before grabbing a knife from the nearby wedding cake table. In a blind fury, she stabbed Joel multiple times in the chest. Guests watched in horror, unable to comprehend how the joyous occasion had turned so violently tragic. Investigators had initially suspected Rebecca, but as they combed through witness statements and pieced together the timeline of events, they realized Patricia's behavior was more suspicious. Surveillance footage from the venue showed Patricia acting nervously in the moments leading up to the stabbing, and multiple guests reported seeing her approach Joel just before the attack. On March 2, 2020, police arrested Patricia Donovan at her home in Boston. She didn't seem surprised. In fact, she showed little emotion as officers led her away in handcuffs. The news of Patricia's arrest devastated Joel's family and friends. The thought of a mother killing her own son over an affair left them heartbroken and searching for answers. Many struggled to understand how Patricia's secret obsession had turned so deadly. The trial of Patricia Donovan began in late November 2021 back at the Pima County Superior Court in Arizona. The prosecution, led by 45-year-old Assistant District Attorney Maria Foxcomb, laid out a clear and shocking case. Foxcomb, known for her methodical and passionate approach, argued that Patricia had been driven by a toxic combination of shame, obsession, and jealousy. She painted a picture of a woman so desperate to protect her affair with her son's fiancée that she resorted to murder when it was exposed in front of all their wedding guests. Foxcomb played surveillance footage from the wedding venue showing Patricia's erratic behavior leading up to the stabbing. She called multiple witnesses who had seen Patricia grabbing the knife intended for the wedding cake and using it to fatally stab her son, Joel Donovan. On the defense side was 54-year-old Mark Dempsey, a seasoned attorney known for his skill in high-profile cases. Dempsey argued that Patricia acted out of a moment of intense emotional distress and shouldn't be held fully responsible for her actions. He claimed the public humiliation caused by Joel's outburst had pushed her into a temporary psychotic break. Dempsey tried to convince the jury that Patricia's mental state should lead to a reduced charge of manslaughter instead of murder. The jury deliberated for just under 2 days. On December 15, 2021, Patricia Donovan was found guilty of second-degree murder. The sentencing was swift, minus 20 years to life in an Arizona state prison. Many of Joel's family members felt that justice had been served, but the pain of losing him in such a horrific way would never fade. Patricia, on the other hand, showed little reaction to the verdict, staring blankly as the sentence was read. The verdict left a lasting impact on everyone involved. Joel's friends and family were left to pick up the pieces, grappling with the complicated emotions of love, betrayal, and loss. After Patricia Donovan's trial and sentencing, life for everyone involved took a dramatic turn. The Donovan family, once well respected in their Boston community, was now overshadowed by the tragic events that unfolded in Marana, Arizona. Rebecca Abernethy Donovan, Patricia's lover, and Joel's widow, faced intense public scrutiny. Shunned by many in Boston, Rebecca struggled to find stability. She left her marketing job, unable to cope with the backlash from both her professional and personal circles. She also moved to a different city to escape the constant media attention. Rebecca's former colleagues at her old job, a marketing firm known for its innovative campaigns, expressed shock and disappointment over the scandal. In contrast, Patrick Daniel Walsh, Joel's best man, tried to rebuild his life. Though he was never charged with any crime, Patrick faced significant fallout due to his affair with Rebecca. His reputation as a school teacher suffered, and he found it hard to maintain his friendships and professional relationships. Patrick took a leave of absence from his teaching position at Boston's East End Middle School and started a new job in a different state, away from the intense scrutiny of his past. Patricia Donovan began serving her 20-life sentence in a state prison in Arizona. Her once orderly life had unraveled completely. Patricia's incarceration was marked by a series of struggles as she adjusted to prison life. The emotional toll of her actions, coupled with the isolation from her family, made her remaining years behind bars particularly challenging. The impact of the case extended beyond the immediate families involved. The Marana wedding venue, once a symbol of celebration, became a somber reminder of the tragedy. Local media continued to cover the story, keeping the community's attention on the shocking events of that February day. Life for everyone connected to the case had been forever changed. The search for normalcy amid the aftermath of such a tragic and public event was an ongoing struggle for all involved. David Hale was a 41-year-old man who lived in Ardmore, Oklahoma, a small town known for its conservative values and tight-knit community. He owned a successful car dealership in town, Hale Auto Sales, which had been in his family for generations. He was a well-respected businessman, known for his honesty and integrity. David was also a deacon at the local Baptist church, where he was deeply involved in community events. On the outside, David seemed like the perfect family man, hardworking, kind, and committed to his wife, Anne, and their daughter, Macy. But beneath this clean-cut image, David carried a heavy secret. For years, he struggled with his sexuality, which was at odds with the traditional values of his town and his church. This inner turmoil led him to live a double life, often traveling to Oklahoma City and Dallas for anonymous sex with other men. While he was devoted to his family in many ways, David felt emotionally distant from them, especially as his marriage to Anne had grown cold and loveless. In the years before his death, he struggled to reconcile his true sexual feelings with the life he felt obligated to lead. One of those sexual relationships was with Hunter Davis, his daughter Macy's 18-year-old boyfriend. Hunter, a high school football star, had grown close to David after Macy introduced him to the family. On the surface, David acted as a mentor to Hunter, offering him guidance, helping him find work at the dealership, and even giving him financial support. But in reality, David was using this mentorship as a way to Hunter into a secret sexual relationship with him. David's double life began to catch up with him in the summer of 2021. His daughter, Macy, had just graduated from high school and was looking forward to starting classes at a local community college. She was excited about her future and was planning to marry Hunter that fall. David, meanwhile, was struggling to keep his affair hidden while managing the growing tension in his home. Macy, always close with her father, started to notice his strange behavior but was clueless to what was really going on. In the days leading up to his death, David seemed distracted, his mind clearly on more than just his business and family obligations. He spent more time than usual in private, often taking long drives late at night or shutting himself away in his home office. His double life was finally unraveling, leading to the fateful confrontation that would cost him his life. On the morning of August 14, 2021, at around 7:00 a.m., David Hale's body was found by his daughter, Macy, in the bathroom of their home. It was a Saturday, and like many small towns, Ardmore, Oklahoma was quiet. Macy had woken up early, planning to go out for breakfast at Denny's with her boyfriend Hunter. She knocked on her father's bathroom door but got no answer. When she opened it, she was met with a horrific sight. David was lying on the cold tile floor, a pool of blood surrounding him. The bathroom mirror was splattered, and the handgun that David kept for protection was lying on the floor next to his lifeless hand. Macy screamed, dropping her phone as she stood frozen in shock. After a few moments, she ran back to her room, grabbed her phone off the floor, and called 911. Macy's voice trembled as she spoke to the dispatcher, struggling to explain what had happened. Her mind raced as she replayed the events of the last few days, trying to make sense of how her father, the man she had looked up to all her life, could now be dead. The dispatcher tried to calm her down, asking her to stay on the line until help arrived. Macy remained panicked, pacing back and forth between the bathroom and the living room, trying to catch her breath. Within minutes, the first responders arrived at the Hale residence, a modest ranch-style house on the outskirts of town. The paramedics quickly confirmed what Macy already knew: her father was dead. As the reality set in, Macy collapsed onto the front porch, tears streaming down her face. Her world had been turned upside down in an instant. News of the tragedy spread quickly throughout Ardmore. In a town where gossip moved fast, especially in the age of Facebook and local news websites, word of David Hale's death shocked the entire community. Neighbors began gathering outside the Hale house, whispering and speculating about what could have happened to the man they knew as a kind and upstanding citizen. Macy was taken to the police station shortly after her father's body was found. Still in shock, she could barely process what was happening. Her mother, Ann, had been out of town visiting her sister in Tulsa and was on her way back, completely unaware of the nightmare awaiting her. By mid-morning, the small, quiet town of Ardmore was buzzing with confusion, fear, and rumors about what had led to the death of David Hale. The Ardmore Police Department arrived on the scene around 7:30 a.m. on August 14, 2021, less than 30 minutes after Macy Hale made the frantic 911 call. Lead investigator Detective Greg Marshall, a seasoned officer with over 15 years on the force, was known for his methodical approach to crime scenes. The bathroom where David Hale's body was found was small but recently renovated, with white walls and white tile flooring. It was a mess. Blood had pooled around David's head, and splatters covered the sink, mirror, and walls. The handgun, a Smith & Wesson .38, lay on the floor near David's right hand. It was clear that David had been shot at close range. The bullet had entered his chest, leaving no chance for survival. The detectives took in the details. The rest of the house was undisturbed. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, and nothing appeared to be stolen. It seemed unlikely that this was a robbery gone wrong, especially in a town like Ardmore, where violent crime was rare. Detective Marshall knelt next to the body, noting the position of the gun and David's hand. There was no indication of a struggle in the bathroom, but something about the scene felt off to him. He had another officer to dust for fingerprints on the gun and check for any other trace evidence in the room. He also requested a thorough examination of David's phone, which was sitting on the counter next to the sink. Marshall knew that in today's world, people's phones often held secrets, and he suspected David's would be no different. As the investigation continued, the police used luminol, a chemical agent, to check for any blood traces that might have been cleaned up elsewhere in the house. The only blood present was in the bathrooms, suggesting that David had been killed there and not moved after his death. Crime scene photographers documented every angle, making sure nothing was missed. By noon, the detectives had gathered all the evidence they could from the scene. The body was taken to the local coroner for a full autopsy, which would later confirm that David had died from a single gunshot wound to the chest. As Marshall wrapped up their initial investigation, it was clear they were dealing with more than just a simple accident or home invasion. Something much more personal had happened here. Macy Hale, David's 18-year-old daughter, was the first person the police questioned. Still in shock after finding her father's body, she was taken to the Ardmore Police Department later that morning. Detective Greg Marshall knew this would be a delicate interrogation. Macy was emotional, her face pale, and her hands trembling as she sat in the small, windowless interview room. Macy was fresh out of high school with plans to start community college in the fall. She was known around town for her outgoing personality and dedication to soccer, often seen at the local field in her Adidas gear. Her relationship with her father had always seemed strong, though in recent weeks, according to friends, Macy had been quieter and more withdrawn. Detective Marshall wanted to understand why. He started the interview gently, asking Macy about her relationship with her father. Macy described her dad as a hardworking man, always at the car dealership, but still making time for Sunday dinners in church. Her voice wavered as she recalled how their relationship had recently changed. Just days before the murder, Macy had discovered something shocking that shattered her world. She had found sexually explicit messages on her boyfriend Hunter's phone, revealing an affair between Hunter and her father. Macy's discovery had left her devastated, and the detectives could see the raw emotion on her face as she talked. She felt betrayed by both men and didn't know how to handle the situation. "I just wanted things to go back to normal," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't want to believe what I saw." Marshall listened carefully. The motive for Macy to be involved in her father's death was clear: anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. However, as the interrogation continued, Macy insisted that despite her rage, she would never hurt her father. Her alibi was solid, too. On the night of the murder, she had spent most of the evening with Hunter, who she still loved despite his affair with her father, and several friends had seen them together at a local ice cream shop, Brahms, a popular spot in Ardmore. Surveillance footage from the store confirmed her presence there, giving her an airtight alibi for the time of the crime. Though Macy's emotional state and recent discovery pointed to her as a potential suspect, the detectives ultimately found no physical evidence linking her to the murder. Marshall, however, couldn't shake the feeling that this family's secrets ran much deeper than they appeared. Next on the police's list of suspects was Anne Hale, David's 39-year-old wife. Anne had been married to David for 20 years and was well known in Ardmore for her deep involvement in the church and the local community. As a stay-at-home mom, she spent much of her time organizing church events, leading Bible study groups, and volunteering at the local food pantry. Outwardly, Anne appeared to have the perfect life: a loving husband, a bright daughter, and a strong reputation in their conservative town. However, as the detectives dug deeper, they uncovered cracks in her seemingly perfect marriage. Friends and neighbors described the relationship between Anne and David as strained. Over the past few years, the two had grown distant, with David spending more time at his car dealership and Anne pouring herself into church activities. It was no secret that their loveless marriage lacked the intimacy it once had. Detective Greg Marshall brought Anne in for questioning 2 days after the murder. When she walked into the police station, she looked tired and grief-stricken, her eyes red from crying. Dressed in a simple floral dress, Anne clutched a tissue in her hand as she sat down across from the investigators. At first, Anne seemed cooperative, answering questions about her husband's routine in their marriage. She admitted that things hadn't been the same between them for a long time. "We were more like roommates than husband and wife," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't remember the last time he touched me." But when the detectives brought up the affair between David and Hunter, Anne's demeanor changed. She seemed shocked at the news, almost as if she couldn't believe it. As the interrogation continued, the detectives pressed her about her whereabouts the night of the murder. Anne claimed she had been out of town visiting her sister in Tulsa. It was on her way back, completely unaware of the nightmare awaiting her. Her story seemed plausible, but the police couldn't ignore the fact that Anne had a clear motive. The betrayal of both her husband and her daughter's boyfriend would be enough to push anyone over the edge. Anne's emotions were a mix of grief and anger during the interrogation. She maintained her innocence, but didn't deny that the revelation of the affair had deeply affected her. Still, like her daughter, Anne had no physical evidence linking her to the murder, and the detectives knew they needed more to definitively rule her out or confirm her involvement. On the morning of August 23, 2021, just 2 days after David Hale's murder, Ardmore detectives received a crucial break in the case. It was a humid, overcast day with temperatures in the low 90s, and the conservative town was still buzzing with spicy gossip about the crime. At around 10 a.m., Detective Greg Marshall got a call from the forensics lab. The teen had found a key piece of evidence that had been overlooked during the initial search of the Hale home. The gun used to kill David had traces of fingerprints on it, but they didn't belong to Anne or Macy. The detectives quickly returned to the Hale residence to re-examine the crime scene. The house had already been searched extensively, but this new development prompted another, more thorough inspection as they started retracing their steps through the house. The bathroom where David was found was still cordoned off, with unclean bloodstains still marking the spot where his body had been discovered. The gun, a Smith & Wesson revolver, had been carefully bagged as evidence, but now the forensic report gave them a new direction. The fingerprints on the gun matched Hunter Davis, Macy's boyfriend, who had been close to the family in many different ways for the past 2 years. This revelation raised immediate questions. Why were Hunter's prints on the gun? And what was his role in the murder? Detective Marshall recalled that during his brief initial interview, Hunter had seemed nervous but not overly suspicious. He had mentioned being with Macy at Braun's ice cream shop that evening, where several friends had confirmed his alibi. However, the prints on the gun painted a different picture, one that placed Hunter at the crime scene. The detectives knew they had to proceed carefully. They contacted Hunter and asked him to come in for a follow-up interview. Meanwhile, they began piecing together his connection to the Hale family. David had taken Hunter under his wing, offering him a job at the dealership and financial support in exchange for illicit sex. But the discovery of the affair had turned everything upside down. The new evidence gave the detectives more questions than answers, but it was clear that Hunter's involvement was deeper than they had initially thought. As the investigation progressed, the team felt they were getting closer to uncovering the truth. For the first time since the murder, they had a tangible lead that could break the case wide open. Hunter Davis, Macy Hale's 18-year-old boyfriend, quickly became the focus of the investigation after the discovery of his fingerprints on the gun that killed David Hale. Hunter, a well-known football star at Ardmore High School, had charmed most of the town with his athletic abilities and friendly demeanor. But behind that image was a troubled young man who had grown up in a difficult home environment. His mother struggled with drug addiction, and his father had long battled alcoholism. David Hale had stepped in as a parental figure, offering Hunter a summer job at his car dealership and even giving him a place to stay when things got rough at home. When Hunter arrived at the Ardmore Police Department for his second interview, the tension in the room was palpable. Detective Greg Marshall was ready to confront him with the new evidence. Hunter looked uneasy as he sat down, his hands fidgeting on the table. Wearing a faded Sooners t-shirt and jeans, he no longer carried the confident swagger he was known for on the football field. The detectives began by asking Hunter to walk them through the night of the murder again. He repeated his story. He had been with Macy at Brahms, grabbing burgers and shakes. But when confronted with the fingerprint evidence, his face went pale. He stammered, trying to explain how his prints could have ended up on the gun, and swore he didn't kill him. The detectives pressed him further, asking about his sexual relationship with David. Hunter hesitated before admitting that David had been more than just a mentor. He was his lover. Their relationship had turned into something so intense and passionate Hunter didn't know how to handle. He felt trapped, loyal to Macy, but manipulated by David, who had both helped him financially and used him for sex. "I didn't want any of this," Hunter said, his voice cracking. As the interrogation continued, Hunter's emotional state shifted from defensive to desperate. He denied any involvement in David's death, but seemed genuinely conflicted. He insisted that he loved Macy and wanted nothing to do with David anymore, but the detectives weren't convinced. His prints on the gun and his history with David were enough to keep him under suspicion. Though Hunter's responses were emotional and at times erratic, the detectives knew they needed more concrete evidence before they could determine his true role in David's murder. For now, Hunter remained one of the prime suspects, his relationship with the victim casting a long shadow over the investigation. On August 27, 2021, just before dawn, the Ardmore Police Department at last pieced together the tragic truth. After weeks of investigation and numerous interviews, they finally identified the murderer, Macy Hale, David's 18-year-old daughter. Macy had been the last person anyone expected to commit such a crime. To the outside world, she was a bright, driven young woman with a passion for soccer and plans for college. But beneath her calm exterior, she had been harboring an overwhelming storm of anger and betrayal. The investigation turned in Macy's direction when her mother, Ann Hale, provided police with a shocking detail. Macy had discovered sexually explicit messages between her father and her boyfriend, Hunter Davis, just days before the murder. This revelation gave Macy both the motive and the means to kill her father. The police immediately re-examined Macy's alibi. She had claimed she was at Brahms, a local fast food chain, with Hunter at the time of the murder. But surveillance footage from that night told a different story. The timestamp didn't match up with the timeline Macy had given during her initial interview. That, combined with forensic evidence linking her to the scene, sealed her fate. The night of August 27, police arrived at the Hale family home, where Macy was staying with her mother. The quiet Ardmore neighborhood, known for its conservative values, was suddenly buzzing with the sight of flashing lights and officers surrounding the house. Detective Greg Marshall, who had been leading the investigation, knocked on the door. Anne answered, visibly shaken, but Macy stood behind her, her face expressionless. "Macy Hale, you are under arrest for the murder of David Hale," Marshall said calmly as he read her rights. Macy showed no visible shock. Instead, she remained eerily calm, as if she had already accepted her fate. She complied with the arrest without resistance. As Macy was handcuffed and led to the police cruiser, Ann Hale collapsed onto the front porch, sobbing uncontrollably so much she even peed herself. The reality that her own daughter had killed her husband was too much to bear. Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, whispering in disbelief at what had happened in their small, close-knit community. For the Hale family, life would never be the same again. The arrest brought some answers, but it left a trail of devastation in its wake. Macy Hale's trial began on August 31, 2022, in Ardmore, Oklahoma. The courtroom was packed with community members, reporters from local outlets like the Ardmore Daily, and members of the Hale family. The trial was a focal point of local news, given the shockwaves the murder had sent through this small, tight-knit town. A prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Granger, argued that Macy Hale had acted out of anger and betrayal. Granger, known for his meticulous approach, presented evidence showing that Macy had discovered inappropriate messages between her father, David Hale, and her boyfriend, Hunter Davis. The prosecution claimed that this discovery had pushed Macy to murder her father in a fit of rage. The key evidence included the murder weapon, David's handgun, and Macy's fingerprints on it. Granger painted a picture of a young woman overwhelmed by jealousy and heartbreak, unable to control her emotions. Macy's defense attorney, Lula Ray McDonald, a 72-year-old veteran lawyer with a reputation for defending difficult cases, argued that Macy had acted in a moment of extreme emotional distress. McDonald pointed out that Macy had no prior criminal record and had been a loving daughter before discovering the affair. She claimed that Macy's actions were the result of a severe emotional breakdown rather than premeditated murder. McDonald asked the jury to consider Macy's age and mental state when making their decision. Throughout the trial, Macy's mother, Ann Hale, sat in the courtroom, her face a mask of grief and confusion. The emotional strain was visible on her face, and she often wiped tears from her eyes. Her reaction was one of devastation, reflecting the loss of both her husband and the relationship with her daughter. Macy herself appeared somber, rarely making eye contact with the audience or her mother. On September 10, 2022, the jury returned a verdict of guilty of second-degree murder. The verdict was met with mixed reactions from the community. Some felt justice had been served, while others were saddened by the tragic outcome. The judge sentenced Macy to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. For the Hale family, the trial marked the end of a harrowing chapter. Macy's conviction brought a sense of closure, but it also left deep wounds in the family and the community. The tragic events had forever changed the lives of everyone involved. After Macy Hale's trial, the impact on those involved was profound. Ardmore, Oklahoma, a town known for its close-knit community and traditional values, had been shaken by the murder and the subsequent legal proceedings. Macy Hale, now serving a 25-year sentence at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma, faced a life drastically different from the one she had planned. Her time in prison was marked by isolation and regret. The once bright future she had envisioned, including her plans for college and a career, had been replaced by a harsh reality. Macy's story was widely covered in local media, including the Ardmore Daily and news stations like KXI-TV. The media coverage, while providing updates on her case, also served as a constant reminder of the tragic events and the lives changed forever. Ann Hale, David's widow, struggled to find normalcy in her life. She had to deal with the loss of her husband and the betrayal of her daughter. Ann, known for her involvement in local church activities and charity events, found solace in her faith. She continued to lead Bible study groups at the church, but did so with a heavy heart. The community rallied around her, offering support and condolences. Despite the support, Ann found it difficult to move past the betrayal and the fractured family relationships. Hunter Davis, Macy's former boyfriend, also faced significant challenges. After the murder, Hunter left Ardmore and went to live with relatives in a different state. His reputation as a high school football star was tarnished by his involvement in the scandal. Hunter attempted to rebuild his life away from the media spotlight, focusing on finding a job and starting over. However, the emotional scars from the affair and the murder remained with him, affecting his relationships and self-esteem. In summary, the lives of Macy Hale, Ann Hale, and Hunter Davis were forever altered by the murder. The community of Ardmore continued to deal with the emotional aftermath, trying to find healing in the wake of such a profound tragedy.